a loyal German shepherd who had sacrificed his entire life to protect people, suddenly became the only friend of a little girl suffering from psychological trauma. When everyone else had given up, could the dog's unconditional love save her from the deepest loneliness? This special bond would change both of their lives forever. But would it be enough to break the silence the girl had kept for 18 months? The truth would be revealed. But what price would have to be paid? The Bennett family lived in a small house in the Woodside Grove neighborhood, where life flowed peacefully with quiet afternoons and the sound of children's laughter. Daniel and Helen had been married for over a decade, and they shared a daughter named Emma, a 6-year-old girl they both loved beyond measure. Emma was the pride of their family, with bright eyes and a smile that never left her face. She was the center of their world, making Daniel and Helen's lives complete. However, everything changed in an instant on one fateful day. A horrific car accident occurred on the road leading to Emma's school. The little girl witnessed a tragedy, a person losing their life right before her eyes. The image of the crash, the frantic screams, and the ensuing chaos sent Emma into a deep psychological state. Since that day, she had not spoken a single word. 18 months passed, and Emma remained completely silent, refusing to communicate with anyone, not even meeting anyone's gaze. Daniel and Helen tried everything they could think of to help their daughter. They took Emma to see psychologists, doctors, and tried numerous treatments, but nothing worked. Emma remained mute. She was like a stranger in her own home, a shadow of herself. Every time Daniel tried to strike up a conversation, or Helen reached out to hold her, Emma would coldly refuse. The couple felt as if they were trapped in a world of invisibility, unable to find a way to bring their daughter back. The situation pushed the Bennett family to the brink. Helen, a compassionate nurse who always cared for others, now felt helpless and exhausted. She had tried everything, yet all efforts seemed to be in vain. Daniel, a strong and determined civil engineer, felt an unbearable pain. He didn't know how to help his daughter, how to bring her back from the silent world she had built for herself. They lived in constant worry, with each day passing like a battle. No one knew what the future held. At night, when looking at Emma's silent face, Helen would often lie awake, searching for a solution but finding no answers. Daniel, too, couldn't stop thinking about what he could do. Could he ever get Emma to speak again? Or would things remain like this forever? Despite the overwhelming darkness, Daniel and Helen didn't give up. They believed that Emma could still change, that one day she might find her voice again. But they also knew that their family's life would never be the same, and they had to do whatever it took to find a piece of the memory they had lost. And it was in the hardest moment, when everything seemed hopeless, that something unexpected began to unfold. Shadow, a wandering German shepherd, appeared in their neighborhood. No one knew where the dog had come from, but one thing was certain. Shadow's presence would bring about a change neither Daniel nor Helen had anticipated, was drawn to Shadow every time he appeared. And there was something in her gaze that spoke louder than words. It wasn't just curiosity. It was as if she recognized something in him, a silent understanding, a bond that neither of them could put into words. For Emma, this dog was different. His presence felt like a quiet invitation, like he was offering her a safe space, a place where she could just be, without expectations, without the pressure to speak. Every afternoon, as the sun began to set and the world outside grew quiet, Emma would find herself drawn to the balcony again. She didn't have to look for him. Somehow, she always knew when Shadow would be near. The pattern was always the same. He would slowly make his way down the street, his tired legs carrying him with a heaviness that mirrored the weight Emma herself had carried for so long. But there was something beautiful about him. something that made Emma feel less alone in her own silence. Shadow didn't bark or wag his tail like other dogs. He simply watched, as though he was waiting for something, or perhaps for someone. He didn't ask for attention. He didn't demand anything. He was just there, existing in the quiet, as if he too understood the importance of solitude. Yet, every time Emma looked at him, she felt a connection. A quiet kind of communication passed between them, without words, without sound, just a knowing. It was as if Shadow was her mirror, reflecting back the loneliness, the sadness, the emptiness that she hadn't been able to express. And yet there was something in his eyes that seemed to say, "I understand. You don't have to be alone anymore." One day, as Emma stood by the balcony watching him, Shadow did something unexpected. He stopped right in front of the Bennett house and lifted his head to gaze at her. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a brief moment Emma felt her heart stir. There was no need for words. The silence between them was filled with understanding. Emma didn't know why, but in that moment it felt like the silence didn't matter. It felt like it was okay not to speak, that maybe one day she would find her voice again when she was ready. From that day on, Shadow appeared at the same time every evening, as if he knew when Emma needed him the most. Helen and Daniel still didn't understand the bond growing between their daughter and the stray dog. They thought he was just another lost animal, looking for scraps. But Emma knew better. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was something more, a companion, a quiet protector, a friend who understood her pain without needing to be told. There was a warmth in her heart now, a warmth that had been missing for so long. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Slowly, very slowly, Emma began to show small signs of life again. Her eyes softened when she saw Shadow, and sometimes, just sometimes, she would follow him with her gaze for a little longer than usual. She wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. But the quiet presence of Shadow made her feel like it was okay to be still. Like it was okay to heal at her own pace. And in that quiet, in that stillness, something began to change. The silence, once so heavy, started to feel less suffocating. Shadow was her anchor, her silent companion in a world that had once been too loud. It wasn't about words or grand gestures. It was about the simple, unspoken connection between them, a connection that neither Emma nor Shadow could fully understand, but one that was enough to begin the healing process. Helen and Daniel didn't know it yet, but the dog that had wandered into their lives was slowly helping their daughter find her way back, one silent step at a time. It was a quiet kind of communication, unspoken but understood. It was as if Emma and Shadow had found their own way to understand each other without the need for words. One morning, as Emma stood on the balcony, she gently tossed a piece of bread down to Shadow. The dog didn't rush to grab it, but waited until the piece fell near him, and then slowly picked it up, eating at his own calm pace. These small actions began to form an unspoken bond between them, one that neither needed to voice. Despite the silence, Emma felt a strange comfort when she was near Shadow. Every time she saw him eating the scraps she offered, it was as though someone, somewhere, understood her, without a single word being exchanged. Shadow never approached Emma, never made any moves toward her, but every day he would sit beneath the large tree in the Bennett garden, his eyes always directed up at the balcony where Emma stood. Shadow seemed like a silent guardian, watching everything in the neighborhood, but the only one he truly focused on was Emma. He wasn't an ordinary dog. There was a tranquility about him, like he already understood his role in this story, a role as a quiet friend, there to protect and comfort. Daniel and Helen had no idea what was happening. They were still lost in the cycle of therapy appointments, still bringing Emma to specialists, but nothing was changing. Emma remained silent, keeping her distance from her parents, refusing to communicate. Helen continued to encourage Daniel, but gradually they both felt the distance between them growing. Every day felt like they were drifting further apart, unsure of how to help their daughter find her way back. They didn't know if any therapy could change things. Yet, in their hearts, a flicker of hope still remained. But Emma began to show small signs of change. She started to open up more, though these changes were not easy to notice. Each time she threw food for Shadow, she watched him eat with a faint smile, a small gesture, but one that indicated Emma wasn't entirely lost in her own world anymore. She started to look around more, her eyes lighting up just a little. Sometimes she would glance quickly at Helen or Daniel, like she was trying to reach out, even if she couldn't find the words yet. Helen and Daniel still hadn't realized that Shadow might be playing a crucial role in their daughter's healing process. They kept focusing on the therapies, hoping Emma would soon find her voice again. But what they didn't know was that Shadow was becoming an essential part of Emma's recovery, and his quiet presence was helping her open up, little by little. Emma's sense of loneliness was slowly being lifted, not by the therapy, but by Shadow's silent comfort. Every evening, as the last rays of sunlight lingered in the air, Emma would stand on the balcony, her gaze drifting towards the garden and Shadow. She didn't speak. She just watched the dog from afar, like it had become a habit. It felt like there was an invisible connection between her and Shadow, even though they didn't exchange a word. Emma felt that even though she couldn't speak, Shadow was the only friend she could truly feel. One afternoon, just like every other day, Emma held a piece of bread in her hand, gently tossing it down to Shadow. But this time, she didn't just throw food. She also added a little water. Shadow stood there, waiting, and then carefully picked up the food, eating it slowly as though he could feel the care in Emma's gesture. There were no words spoken, but in every movement of Shadow, Emma felt something deep. It wasn't words, it was understanding. Shadow began to appear every afternoon, sitting beneath the old tree in front of the Bennett house. Day after day, the dog never missed an afternoon. He sat there, his eyes always directed toward Emma, watching her from a distance, never moving away. Shadow never approached Emma, but his presence alone was enough for her to feel safe. He was like a silent protector, needing nothing but to be there, a shadow in Emma's world. Though she couldn't say it, in those quiet afternoons, Emma began to realize something. She no longer felt as lonely as before. Every time she threw food down to Shadow, it wasn't just about feeding a dog. It felt like she was giving a piece of herself. These small gestures reflected a connection between the two, even though no words were exchanged. Emma felt like she had found a real friend, a friend who didn't judge, didn't demand, and was always there when she needed him the most. As the days went by, the bond between Emma and Shadow grew deeper, though no one in the Bennett family noticed. They still thought Emma was just feeding a stray dog, but to Emma, Shadow had become her only emotional anchor, a quiet companion in her journey to find herself again. With Shadow, Emma didn't have to face empty words of consolation or advice from Helen and Daniel. She didn't need any of that. What she needed was his silent presence, and that was the most important thing. Shadow never rushed, never pressured her, but his companionship was exactly what Emma needed more than ever. Every day, Emma would find a reason to look out the balcony and feed Shadow, even though she never said a word. And every day, she felt like she was getting closer to an invisible friend, someone she could always rely on, never having to fear being abandoned. Shadow was an invisible source of comfort, helping her find peace in a world full of anxiety and fear. But Shadow wasn't just a silent friend. Even though no one could see it, Even though no words were exchanged, Shadow had become an invisible protector, always standing by Emma whenever she needed him. Every evening, as the sun slowly faded and the clouds began to cover the sky, Shadow would appear under the old tree in the Bennett garden. He never left his spot for hours, his eyes always focused on Emma, as if he didn't want to lose sight of her, not even for a second. Shadow never rushed toward Emma, but he was always there, no matter what she was doing, patiently watching every movement of hers. The seemingly insignificant actions Emma took, like throwing food down for him, became part of a quiet connection between the two of them. Shadow understood his role, not just as a friend, but as a protector. Emma couldn't put it into words, but she could feel the protection Shadow offered. That feeling didn't come just from the fact that he was always there. It also came from the safety Shadow gave her every time she looked into his eyes. The look wasn't a challenge or words spoken, but a quiet strength, like a promise that Emma would never have to face the world alone. Shadow wasn't just a stray dog. He was a silent guardian, always watching over her, in ways words could never describe. Speak again, that perhaps with enough patience, Emma would open up. But each time they saw her quietly standing on the balcony, Helen's heart felt heavier. Daniel was no better. He spent his days searching for advice from friends and colleagues, but each new method brought a tiny glimmer of hope, only to be swallowed by the growing despair. They didn't know that the change they were waiting for wasn't coming from therapies or scientific methods, but from the silent presence of a dog. Shadow, with his loyalty and patience, had given Emma the comfort that no one else could provide. The dog had created a safe space for Emma, one where she didn't need to speak, where all she had to do was feel the protection and unconditional love that Shadow gave her. Meanwhile, Shadow continued his silent duty. No words, no demands, just a steady presence. Each day, the bond between Emma and Shadow grew stronger, even though no words were exchanged. Emma started to open up more when she was with Shadow, though she still couldn't speak. Instead of silently standing by herself, Emma now sought Shadow whenever she felt lonely. Every afternoon, she stood on the balcony and threw food down for him, but this time, she didn't just feed him. She looked directly into Shadow's eyes, holding his gaze a little longer than before. That look wasn't one of curiosity, but a quiet connection. Emma felt that Shadow would never abandon her, that the dog would always be there to protect her, no matter what happened. Shadow didn't leave. Each afternoon, he would return to his familiar spot under the old tree, where Emma could always see him. He never ran off, always sitting quietly, watching Emma from a distance. A silent protection. Not needing to do anything, just being there was enough for Emma to feel safe. Day by day, Emma felt comforted each time she saw Shadow. The feeling of loneliness, the emptiness inside her, gradually began to fade. Emma didn't need to say anything, but there was a subtle change in the way she looked at the world around her. Shadow had become the only friend she truly had, the friend she trusted more than anyone else, even if she couldn't express her feelings with words. The relationship between Emma and Shadow developed quietly and naturally. Daniel and Helen still didn't notice the change. They simply thought Emma was seeking a little comfort from the stray dog she'd found in the garden. Even though Helen noticed Emma smile faintly when she looked at Shadow, or when Emma quietly tossed food to him, she didn't see it as a sign of a major change in her daughter's healing process. Helen and Daniel continued their normal life, taking Emma to therapy, hoping that one day their daughter would speak again. But Emma wasn't just waiting for the world to change. She was beginning to heal in her own way, quietly, with Shadow by her side, a silent protector, always watching over her without needing to say a single word. Didn't show any interest in staying in the shelter and wandered away, Mark felt a deep sense of responsibility for his old companion. He knew Shadow couldn't just be a normal dog. He had a purpose, and it seemed like fate had led him to the Bennett family. Shadow couldn't be forgotten, Mark continued, his voice a little softer. He's not just a regular dog, he's a protector. And if he's here, with Emma, maybe there's something more. Something meant to be. Daniel, still in shock from this revelation, listened carefully as Mark shared the true history of the German Shepherd. His mind raced. How could a dog like Shadow, so deeply trained for high-stakes situations, end up as Emma's quiet guardian? What was it about him that had been drawn to her, to this house, in particular? Mark's words were like pieces falling into place. He described how Shadow had been there in moments when lives were on the line, how the dog, with his instinct and training, saved lives and provided comfort in the midst of chaos. But now Shadow was in a new role, one that was far different from the missions Mark had entrusted him with. He was now Emma's silent protector, helping her heal without asking for anything in return. Shadow's always been more than just a tool, Mark said, his tone reflecting the bond they'd shared. He's a friend, a brother in arms. He saves not just physically, but emotionally, too. And Emma, I think she needs him just as much as he needs her. As Daniel processed Mark's words, he felt an overwhelming mix of gratitude and wonder. Shadow wasn't just a stray dog who had wandered into their lives. He was more than that. He was part of something much bigger, a creature whose past had shaped him into the perfect companion for Emma. He had come into her life for a reason, to give her exactly what she needed: protection, comfort, and quiet companionship. In that moment, Daniel realized that the healing Emma had been searching for didn't come from the doctors or the therapies. It came from Shadow. The silent strength and steady presence of the dog was the catalyst for Emma's gradual change. It wasn't a miracle. It was a quiet, powerful bond, one that neither Emma nor Shadow needed to speak about, but one that would change both their lives forever. As the conversation wound down, Mark placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie and understanding. "Take care of him. He's a rare one, and he's found his place here, in this family." Daniel nodded, his eyes full of new understanding. Shadow had always been a soldier, a hero. Now he was a friend, a protector, a healer. The truth about Shadow had been revealed, and the more Daniel thought about it, the more he realized how much this dog had already done for their family. Without saying a word, without ever asking for anything, Shadow had become Emma's lifeline, a gentle guide out of the darkness, leading her toward a future where she could begin to heal, one silent step at a time. As Mark left the house, his footsteps fading into the distance, Daniel stood at the door, watching Shadow outside. The dog sat under the tree, as he always did, his eyes watching Emma from afar. No words were needed. In the stillness, in the space between them, everything was understood. Shadow was home. And Emma was no longer alone. When they retired from service, most people would think that these dogs would be adopted by loving families. But what few knew was that many dogs like Shadow faced a less talked-about fate. They were abandoned or sent to shelters where they didn't receive proper care. As Daniel listened to Mark's words, a realization began to dawn on him. The dog they had taken in wasn't just a stray. Shadow was a brave companion, a skilled and extraordinary dog. Shadow hadn't just appeared in Emma's life like a regular dog. Perhaps he was seeking something else, a new purpose, after years of protecting and helping Mark. Mark also reminded Daniel that Shadow had lost his old partner, and now it seemed the dog was searching for a new companion to continue his protective mission. Mark's story shed light on many things about Shadow, and Daniel began to see just how crucial this dog was in Emma's life. Although Shadow couldn't speak, he had given Emma an invisible comfort. Maybe it was Shadow's presence that was the key to Emma's gradual opening up. Mark sat down, his eyes thoughtful as he reminisced about the time spent working with Shadow. He began to share stories about their time in the K-9 unit, facing dangerous and demanding tasks together. Shadow wasn't just an intelligent protection dog. He was Mark's most reliable companion. Shadow is a very special dog, Mark began, his voice full of pride. The first time I met him, he was just a pup. But from day one, I knew this dog would never be a normal one. The way he observed and learned quickly impressed me. Shadow didn't just know how to search. He had an incredible ability to read a situation. He could evaluate and make decisions in extremely dangerous circumstances. Mark continued, recounting some of the missions they had worked on. One of the most memorable was when Shadow and Mark were assigned to find a group of drug smugglers hiding in a dense forest. The area was known for its treacherous terrain, and it was nearly impossible to reach. But Shadow led Mark right to where they needed to go, even when Mark couldn't find his way. Shadow had picked up the scent of the criminals, and after completing a series of search tasks, they were able to capture the smugglers without encountering any setbacks. That time, I honestly don't know what I would have done without Shadow, Mark said, his voice sincere. Not only did he know how to track, but he kept calm throughout the whole process. Shadow was never afraid, no matter how dangerous the situation got. He once saved my life when a heavily armed criminal almost attacked me from behind. Shadow immediately charged in and stopped him, without any command, relying solely on his instincts and alertness. Daniel listened to Mark's story, feeling the deep loyalty and special abilities of Shadow. He could almost picture the courage and intelligence of the dog through Mark's tales. But what struck Daniel the most was how Mark spoke about Shadow like a true friend, not just a dog. Even though Shadow had extraordinary skills in his job, he wasn't just following orders. He had a courageous, loyal, and resilient heart. Shadow was more than just a dog to Mark. He was a partner, a protector, and a friend. Daniel now understood why Emma's bond with him had been so immediate and profound. Shadow wasn't just there by chance. He was there because he had a role to play in her healing, one that no one had expected but was exactly what Emma needed. Mark's stories painted a picture of a dog who had faced unimaginable danger and stood as a shield for those he loved. Shadow wasn't just a German shepherd. He was a warrior with a heart that had seen the worst of the world and still chose to offer his protection. Now, Shadow was offering that same loyalty, that same protection to Emma, without asking for anything in return, without needing words, just by being there. Daniel finally saw the full weight of what Shadow meant to their family. He wasn't just a stray dog who had wandered in. He was a silent protector, a guardian sent to help Emma find her way out of the darkness, just as he had once done for Mark. Daniel looked at Shadow, who was still sitting patiently under the tree outside, his eyes watching over Emma. It was clear now, Shadow was home, and he had found a new mission. Shadow isn't just a guard dog, Mark continued. He became a part of my life. When you work in such a dangerous environment, having a friend like Shadow is essential. We didn't just work together, we understood each other. Sometimes I didn't even need to give orders. Shadow already knew what to do. He became my eyes and ears in tough situations, and I knew I could always rely on him. Mark paused for a moment, his gaze drifting as if looking into a distant memory. After I had to transfer Shadow and we weren't working together anymore, I felt this deep emptiness. It wasn't because I couldn't work, it was because I didn't have Shadow by my side anymore. He was my best companion. Daniel listened quietly, a new feeling rising within him. He began to understand that Shadow wasn't just a normal dog. This dog had been through adventures, through highly important and difficult missions. And now, Shadow was standing at a crossroads in his life, where maybe Emma could be the new companion he needed. As Mark finished his story, Daniel looked up at Shadow, realizing that this dog wasn't just a part of the past. he was also a crucial part of Emma's present life. And maybe, just maybe, Shadow would help her find her voice again, just like how the dog had protected Mark over the years. A sudden sense of understanding washed over Daniel. He began to see the importance of Shadow, not just to him, but to Emma, the little girl that he and Helen had been so worried about and desperately trying to help. Mark sat down on the couch near the window, his gaze thoughtful and deep with understanding. He began to speak again, but this time it wasn't about rescue missions or Shadow's heroic acts. This time, Mark spoke about the unique bond between the dog and Emma, a connection that Daniel and Helen had never truly recognized. "You see, Shadow's not just an ordinary dog," Mark said, his voice softening. "He has this incredible ability to sense human emotions. He can always tell when someone's feeling sad, anxious, or when there's something they can't put into words. Not many people understand this, but I've seen it countless times." Shadow could feel the deep sadness in Emma's heart, Mark said, his eyes drifting as if lost in thought. "I think that's why he's always near her, not just to protect her, but to help, to create a safe space for Emma." Daniel felt like he was waking up. He looked over at Shadow, still lying quietly under the tree in the garden, his eyes still focused on the window where Emma stood. Daniel began to realize that Shadow's presence wasn't a coincidence. The dog wasn't just protecting Emma. He understood her better than anyone in the family. "So, Shadow knows when Emma needs help?" Daniel asked gently, his voice soft. Mark nodded. "Exactly. Shadow did this with me in many tough situations. The feeling that he always knew when I needed him, when I was anxious or lonely. And I think with Emma he feels the same thing. This dog isn't just a protector. He's a true friend, the kind of friend Emma needs right now." Daniel felt a shift inside him. He turned back to look at Shadow once more, this time with a different look, full of appreciation. He understood now that even though Emma couldn't speak, this dog had become her silent anchor. Shadow wasn't just keeping her company, he was slowly helping her find her way out of the silence. Through his patience, understanding, and presence, Shadow had already started to help Emma heal, without any words, without any expectations. The bond between Emma and Shadow was more profound than Daniel had ever realized. Shadow had become more than a protector. He was Emma's quiet, steady companion, guiding her back from the darkness in ways no one could have imagined. It could be the friend Emma needed most to overcome her pain, the bridge between her and the world she had closed herself off from. Mark continued. "When I learned that Shadow had been transferred to a rescue organization after his retirement, I thought he'd have to face some lonely days. But then, something strange happened. Shadow began searching for a new friend, and I think that friend was Emma. The dog sensed that she needed help, that she needed a protector, and Shadow chose her. He wasn't just searching for safety. He was searching for a connection, a bond without words." Helen sat beside Mark, her eyes fixed on him and on Shadow. "So the change in Emma isn't just a coincidence?" she asked. "Definitely not," Mark replied. "Emma needed safety, and Shadow is that safety. He understands that Emma is living in a world filled with anxiety and pain, and it's through his silent presence that he's begun to help her open up, even if just a little." Daniel looked back at Emma, standing silently on the balcony. She still hadn't spoken, but her gaze was soft, watching the world outside, as if sensing everything around her. He realized that all along, Shadow had become an important part of Emma's life. No words, no guidance, but Shadow was the key to her slowly finding herself again. The bond between Shadow and Emma wasn't just about protection, it was also about empathy, an understanding that no one in the Bennett family had fully recognized. It was the quiet comfort that helped Emma open up, gradually rediscovering trust in the world around her. Throughout this journey, Shadow was the special friend Emma needed, not just to protect her, but to make her feel safe in a world full of fear that she couldn't share with anyone else. But while Emma and Shadow were building a strong connection, the Bennett family was facing more tension than ever before. Daniel and Helen were growing exhausted from not being able to help Emma. Helen, the always strong and compassionate nurse, now felt helpless. The therapies she pursued hadn't yielded results, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't pull her daughter out of the silent world Emma had created. Every visit to the doctor made Helen feel like she was facing an impenetrable wall. Every new therapy, every treatment plan offered no progress. She began to feel that all her efforts were in vain. Daniel, strong and determined, wasn't any better. He kept searching for solutions for their daughter, but every time he tried a new approach, he was met with disappointment. The weight of failure grew heavier in his chest, and he started to believe that Emma might never speak again. He wondered if she would live her whole life in that silent world, and he didn't know what else to try. The conversations between Helen and Daniel became more strained. They couldn't agree on the best course of treatment for Emma. Helen believed they needed to try new therapies, like art therapy or emotional healing techniques, to help Emma reconnect with the world. But Daniel felt that these methods weren't effective, and he began to doubt whether they were making things worse. He wanted to change direction, to find another solution. Maybe it was time to look outside for help, to take Emma somewhere else. But as the days passed, they were caught in an endless cycle of trial and error. Both of them were holding on to hope, yet nothing was changing. Neither of them could see that the real breakthrough had already happened, not through any therapy or doctor's advice, but through the quiet, patient presence of Shadow, the protector, the silent friend who was slowly leading Emma back from the brink of her silence. Emma seemed to be slipping further away, unable to open up to anyone in the family. Despite gradually opening up, especially to Shadow, Daniel and Helen couldn't grasp the change in their daughter. She continued to communicate with Shadow, but when with her parents, Emma kept her distance. She couldn't speak, but every afternoon when Shadow appeared, she felt safer. The bond between Emma and Shadow grew stronger, and the communication between them didn't need words. The dog understood her, protected her, and that was all Emma needed at that moment. Yet Daniel and Helen couldn't see that Shadow was the only true friend Emma really needed. Each afternoon, when Shadow sat under the old tree, his eyes fixed on Emma, she felt his protection and empathy. Emma still couldn't speak, but there was a subtle change in how she saw the world around her. She no longer sat silently in the darkness of her room. Instead, she spent more time standing on the balcony, gazing out at the garden, finding comfort in Shadow's presence. However, this only made Daniel and Helen more worried. Emma wasn't changing when she was with them, but she was changing when she was near Shadow. Helen still didn't understand that it was Shadow who was crucial in Emma's healing process. Daniel began to feel like maybe they had been wrong for not recognizing Shadow's role sooner. He felt like they had missed an important part of helping Emma through her pain, and the connection between Emma and the dog was the only thing that was helping her find herself again. The tension within the Bennett family continued to escalate. Helen and Daniel didn't know how to reconnect with Emma. They kept trying different therapies, but no progress was being made. Meanwhile, Emma continued to find joy in Shadow's presence, and the bond between the two special friends gradually became the most important element in Emma's healing journey. The tense conversations between Helen and Daniel only deepened the distance between them. But in Emma's heart, the comfort and love from Shadow was all she needed. As the Bennett family faced these challenges, Shadow quietly continued his mission. Although he didn't speak, his presence was crucial in helping Emma gradually open up and regain a part of the strength she had lost. The dog never gave up, always by Emma's side, protecting her with his steady silence. But while Shadow played the role of emotional support for Emma, the tension within the Bennett family reached its peak. Helen and Daniel still couldn't find common ground in helping Emma. The therapies hadn't brought the results they had hoped for, and Helen continued to hold on to hope for new methods. Daniel, on the other hand, had begun to lose faith in traditional therapies. He felt helpless and exhausted with the constant doctor visits, with no change in sight. The tension only increased as every time Helen wanted to try a new therapy, Daniel opposed it, feeling like they had already tried everything and nothing was working. That day, everything seemed to reach its breaking point. Helen had just received a call from the doctor suggesting an art therapy method for Emma and that she could join a special class. Helen eagerly told Daniel, hoping he would agree. But Daniel, after a long and stressful day at work, overwhelmed with worry for their daughter, finally erupted in anger. "Don't you see?" Daniel snapped, his voice cold. "We've tried everything. How many times? Have any of those therapies helped Emma? All we've gotten are failures. We can't keep living in this endless cycle." Helen stared at him, stunned by his reaction. Emma had always been the center of everything, and every decision, every step had always been for their daughter. Helen was exhausted by her own helplessness, but she couldn't accept Daniel giving up hope. "Daniel, we can't give up. We can't let our daughter live in this silent world forever. Emma needs new opportunities. She needs to try something different. She can't stay like this." The tension escalated, and a huge argument broke out between them. The words grew sharper, and neither of them could think of a reasonable solution. From the balcony, Emma could hear her parents fighting. She didn't fully understand what was going on, but the feeling of loneliness and worry surged within her. She turned around and looked toward Shadow, the dog still standing quietly under the old tree, his eyes filled with patience and protection. Helen and Daniel's argument didn't have an end. Finally, silence took over the house. No one spoke. Helen retreated to the bedroom, sat on the bed, and fell into deep thought, tears in her eyes. Daniel stood by the window, staring out, but his eyes seemed unfocused, filled only with helplessness. They could no longer understand each other, and that distance between them grew wider. Emma remained still, silent as ever, but she felt the shift in the air. The conflict in the house made her feel more alone than ever. Even though Shadow was always there, Emma couldn't find a way to share her emotions with her parents. Shadow was the only friend she could rely on, but Emma still couldn't open up fully, not even to those closest to her. Helen and Daniel had tried everything, but their differing views on how to help Emma were pulling them further apart. They loved Emma, but the conflicts between them seemed impossible to resolve. Emma stood in the middle, feeling the pain and helplessness of her parents, but she couldn't speak it, couldn't share that burden. Her silence only made the situation worse, and the Bennett family now faced a new challenge. How could they overcome these tensions and continue supporting Emma on her healing journey? Shadow, with his silent presence, was not part of the argument, but he was slowly becoming the only link left between Emma and the world around her, while the Bennett family struggled to find a way to help Emma escape her silence. Shadow remained there, her loyal friend, her invisible protector, waiting for the day Emma would find her voice again. A heavy, dark cloud covered the sky, and a fierce wind began to pick up. The winds howled through the streets, making everything around seem wild and chaotic. Helen and Daniel were busy inside, preparing for what needed to be done while the storm drew nearer. As usual, Emma stood on the balcony, looking outside, her eyes still silent, still calm. The strong gust of wind suddenly threw Emma off balance. She stepped toward the balcony railing, and just as the wind blew with force, the railing gave way and collapsed. Emma didn't have time to react, her body losing balance, and she fell from the height. In that split-second, Shadow, standing under the tree, reacted instinctively. Without hesitation, the dog leapt into the air, soaring upward to catch Emma. Helen and Daniel didn't realize what was happening at first. All they heard was a loud crash, the sound of something heavy falling. By the time they ran outside, they saw Shadow standing firm, using his body to shield Emma, his own body marked with wounds, blood trickling from several scratches across his fur. Shadow didn't leave her side, standing tall, protecting Emma while she lay motionless, unaware of everything that had just happened. The sight threw the entire Woodside Grove neighborhood into chaos. Neighbors from surrounding homes rushed over, witnessing the scene without understanding the story behind it. Shadow stood there, blood dripping from his body, protecting Emma, but some people mistook the situation and thought Shadow had attacked her. The confusion quickly spread through the neighborhood. Some began shouting, calling 911, while others started filming the scene, and Daniel and Helen were left in a panic, unsure how to stop the misunderstanding. Immediately, a large debate broke out in the community. Some people labeled Shadow as a dangerous dog, while others didn't believe he could have harmed Emma. Helen and Daniel were frantic, trying to explain the truth about Shadow's actions. They hadn't fully processed what had just happened, as everyone in the neighborhood had witnessed Shadow standing guard over Emma with courage and loyalty. The Bennett family was suddenly facing an unexpected crisis. Criticism came pouring in, and Shadow was seen as a threat rather than a protector. Some in the neighborhood called for Shadow to be quarantined, while others attempted to explain his heroic actions. But the misunderstanding was so deep that it sparked panic in the community. Despite his injuries, Shadow never moved. He stood his ground, continuing to protect Emma until help arrived. He had endured so much pain while saving her, but his unwavering strength held steady as a protector, regardless of the agony. When the rescue team arrived, Helen and Daniel rushed to explain the situation. Yet, the misunderstanding about Shadow had not yet been cleared. They found themselves in the middle of a fierce argument, with some understanding the situation and others still unsure. Finally, when the truth was revealed, Helen and Daniel proved that Shadow hadn't attacked Emma, but had, in fact, saved her from a potentially fatal fall. Despite the criticisms and panic from the community, the Bennett family realized something. Shadow wasn't just a regular dog. His bravery and loyalty had saved Emma, and he had become an invaluable protector in her life. After watching the video and hearing the explanation, the neighbors slowly began to understand the truth about Shadow's heroic actions. But before that, the community had endured a long period of tension, misunderstandings, and worry about a dog they didn't truly understand. Shadow wasn't just Emma's protector. He had become the quiet hero of the Bennett family, a dog who always stood guard, protecting her with everything he had, even if it meant sacrificing his own body. The events of that day, when Shadow saved Emma from a dangerous fall, didn't end with a simple heroic act. What followed was a serious misunderstanding from the community, and the Bennett family found themselves in an unexpected battle to defend Shadow. After Emma and Shadow were taken to the hospital by the rescue team, and when the situation finally stabilized, the neighbors began sharing their stories about what they had witnessed. These conversations quickly turned into stories that spread across the neighborhood. Some of the people, especially those who didn't fully understand what had happened, began to label Shadow as a dangerous dog. They couldn't grasp why Shadow was so close to Emma, and more importantly, they couldn't imagine that a dog could have saved her from such a fall. Even though the truth was that Shadow had protected Emma, the rumors and fear spread through the neighborhood, making many believe that the dog could be a danger. Helen and Daniel found themselves caught up in a huge argument with their neighbors. People who didn't know the full story began demanding that Shadow be isolated or even removed from the neighborhood. The tension between the Bennett family and the community escalated, leaving Helen and Daniel feeling confused and deeply hurt. They couldn't understand why people saw Shadow as a threat when he was the only protector Emma had. In the midst of the growing chaos, Mark, Daniel's old friend, the one who had trained Shadow, stepped in to help. Mark wasn't just a friend. He was the one who could help the Bennett family clear up the misunderstanding about Shadow and the dog's actions in that dangerous moment. He knew Shadow wasn't a dangerous dog. He was a loyal and resilient dog. Mark quickly reached out to Daniel and Helen, and after meeting up with them, they decided to clarify everything with the community. Mark shared stories with the neighbors about Shadow's past, about the rescue missions the dog had been a part of in the K9 unit, about the bravery and loyalty Shadow had shown in dangerous situations. He explained that Shadow wasn't just good at sniffing out danger, but also had an ability to sense emotions and threats around him. Mark emphasized that without Shadow, Emma might have faced an accident from which she couldn't have been saved. The stories Mark shared began to change the perception of the people in the neighborhood. Helen and Daniel felt a sense of relief as the truth came to light. Some neighbors started to understand more about Shadow and what the dog had done for Emma. Gradually, their attitudes began to shift. Those who had feared Shadow before now began to see the dog as a silent protector. They realized that Shadow wasn't a stray or dangerous dog. He was Emma's loyal friend. This shift in perception helped ease the tension, but there were still some who remained skeptical and anxious. Mark didn't stop convincing the remaining skeptics in the neighborhood about Shadow's importance in Emma's life. He shared that it wasn't just Emma who needed Shadow. Shadow needed Emma too. These two beings had found each other in difficult circumstances, and now they had formed an inseparable bond. Mark also stated that Shadow's past actions had shown that he could make decisions on his own in dangerous situations, and that was why he could save Emma. Slowly, the confusion in the community began to ease. Those who had heard Mark's story began to see more clearly Shadow's heroic actions. Criticism and panic gave way to admiration and gratitude. However, there were still some who remained cautious, which meant Helen and Daniel had to keep working hard to protect Shadow and maintain the bond between the dog and Emma. Shadow, though injured in the act of saving Emma, stood firm, continuing to protect her when those around him didn't fully understand what had happened. Daniel and Helen realized that, after all, the truth about Shadow and Emma wasn't just a story about a dog saving a girl. It was a story about loyalty, sacrifice, and silent friendship. And while Shadow wasn't a regular dog, he had become so much more to the Bennett family. For Emma, Shadow had become an irreplaceable part of her healing journey, the unconditional protection she needed. Every day, when she saw him beneath the old tree in the garden, Emma felt safe, a shelter she couldn't find in anyone else. Shadow wasn't just protecting her physically, he was helping her overcome the fear and loneliness that lived deep within her. As the community began to understand the truth about Shadow, their attitude started to shift. Those who had once feared that Shadow was a dangerous dog now saw him as a quiet hero. Mark, with his stories about Shadow's past, helped them understand that his action to save Emma wasn't a random instinct, but a deliberate decision, an act of unconditional protection Shadow had given to Emma. The criticisms that once swirled around him gradually turned into admiration, and the neighborhood began to see this dog in a new light. Helen and Daniel felt a sense of relief as the truth about Shadow came to light. No longer did they face suspicious glances or hushed whispers from neighbors. Instead, the community had started to accept Shadow as a part of the Bennett family, and that brought a great sense of peace to Emma. Shadow hadn't just protected her from danger, he had helped her rediscover trust in the world around her. Woodside Grove had changed. Neighbors who once feared Shadow now looked at him as a special friend of Emma's. Some people came by to visit the Bennett family, bringing small gifts to thank Shadow for saving the little girl's life. Others started sharing the story of his heroic act, telling each other about the courage Shadow had shown while protecting Emma. The community's attitude slowly shifted from doubt to deep gratitude. Helen and Daniel realized that Shadow wasn't just a rescue dog. He had become an irreplaceable part of their lives. He had changed not just Emma, but their entire family. Shadow's presence had helped them reevaluate what truly mattered in life, making them realize that sometimes words aren't necessary. Sometimes a silent presence, loyalty, and unconditional protection are all that's needed to heal deep wounds. Despite all the challenges and trials they had faced, Shadow had shown that love and loyalty don't always need to be expressed in words. Occasionally, it's in small actions, in quiet gestures of protection. Throughout Emma's journey, Shadow had been the friend she couldn't live without, helping her open up, conquer her fears, and restore her faith in life. As Emma and Shadow continued to grow, the Bennett family was faced with a new challenge. This time, it wasn't from strangers, but from the chaos left behind by the earthquake. After the situation in the neighborhood settled, and Emma slowly returned to the world around her, and the understanding of Shadow by the neighbors improved, a new danger began to emerge. The destruction caused by the earthquake, the debris left behind, and the shortage of rescue resources had created an opportunity for a group of criminals or outsiders to exploit the unstable situation to steal relief supplies. The chaos continued, and the Woodside Grove community now faced another threat: the infiltration of crime. Chris and Kevin from K9 Speed were called in to secure the area and assist the Bennett family. The experienced K9 handlers quickly arrived, bringing along their team of rescue dogs and the necessary equipment to ensure the neighborhood's safety. Max, Rock, and the other members of the team jumped into action, ready to handle any emergency that came their way. But Shadow didn't need anyone to tell him what to do. The German Shepherd kept doing his job, undeterred. In the following days, while Chris and Kevin led the rescue team and coordinated protection efforts, Shadow did the work no one asked him to do. He became the leader in identifying threats and protecting Emma from anyone who might approach her with bad intentions. Shadow wasn't just a protector. He was a guide in the devastated area, always alert to unusual noises and shadows that crept into the night. Daniel and Helen had become used to living in a state of heightened vigilance. They knew that at any moment, the chaos could be exploited by dangerous people looking to attack. But it was Shadow's resilience that brought them comfort. Each evening, when everyone prepared for another night full of anxiety, Shadow still stood quietly outside, his bright eyes scanning the surroundings like a sentry. He wasn't just there to protect Emma. He was there to stay alert for any potential danger. One evening, when the wind picked up and the air felt tense, Emma stood on the balcony, just like she always did. This time she wasn't just looking at Shadow. She could feel the protection he offered. Shadow wasn't just a companion. He was the only one Emma could completely trust right now. His eyes silently watched over her, and Emma felt that anyone who approached would have to face the dog's fierce determination. Suddenly, a strange noise came from the end of the street. Shadow immediately stood, his ears perked and his eyes unblinking. In those tense moments, even though Emma didn't say a word, she could feel the shift in the air. Shadow leaped into action, leading the K9 team, guiding Chris and Kevin to the source of the noise. A group of strangers had infiltrated the area, trying to sabotage the relief supplies. Chris and Kevin wasted no time, quickly confronting and neutralizing the threat. However, while they dealt with the criminals, Shadow held his ground, guarding Emma. No command, no direction other than the unspoken connection between the dog and the girl. Shadow had recognized his responsibility, and with Emma, He knew he had to be there, protecting her until the threat was eliminated. The confrontation with the criminals wasn't just a test of physical strength and canine fighting skills. It was a race against time. Shadow led every effort, not only battling the intruders but also ensuring Emma's safety in the midst of danger. Each passing minute was a tense standoff, but thanks to Shadow's courage and loyalty, the Bennett family overcame the challenge once again. When everything finally calmed down and the criminals were apprehended, Helen and Daniel looked at Shadow and realized that not only had Emma found her protector, but their family had, too. As everyone began to recover from the attack, the Bennett family realized that their lives were no longer just a series of anxious, fearful days. Instead, they were on a journey of protection, safety, and unconditional love, thanks to Shadow. But the most intense moment hadn't passed yet. After the threat from the criminals was pushed back, no one could have known that the real danger still lingered. Shadow continued his duty, alert and vigilant as always, ensuring that no further harm would come to the family or their neighborhood. With unmatched courage, Shadow didn't stop when the intruders were pushed back. The dog remained vigilant, his eyes never leaving Emma, always ready to spring into action at the slightest threat. Suddenly, a strange noise came from behind the debris. The criminals who hadn't been caught were closing in on the area where the Bennett family was sheltering. They were planning another attack, perhaps to sabotage or continue threatening the family. Shadow immediately sensed the danger. Without a command, the dog sprang into action, his strong body surging forward, quickly positioning himself as a living shield in front of Emma. Helen and Daniel couldn't react fast enough, but they knew that Shadow would never let anyone breach their safe space. Shadow fought fiercely, protecting Emma and the family from the intruders. In the dark, growls and snarls filled the air. Shadow wasn't just fighting with brute strength. He used his intelligence and decisiveness to prevent anyone from getting too close. The dog charged with incredible speed, pushing the first intruder back, growling as he tore through the air with strength. Meanwhile, Max and Rock from K9. Speed quickly followed, coordinating with Shadow to form a protective circle around Emma and the family. Chris and Kevin didn't hesitate either. They quickly fired warning shots, reducing the threat. But it was Shadow's resilience that was the key to calming the situation. The tense moments seemed to stretch on forever. Shadow wasn't just fighting off the attackers, he was protecting Emma, the one he loved and was responsible for guarding. With each move, each bite to subdue an intruder, Shadow's protection became clearer than ever. Emma stood behind, holding Helen's hand tightly, her eyes wide as she watched everything unfold. Yet, in her heart, she felt an incredible sense of peace. Shadow was fighting, but he was also protecting her, the only one who didn't make her feel afraid. Finally, after the attackers were subdued and apprehended, the Bennett family and the K9 speed team exhaled in relief. Helen and Daniel looked at Shadow, their eyes filled with gratitude and appreciation. What Shadow had done wasn't just protecting a person, it was protecting the family of that person, their own family. Shadow had fought not just for duty, but for love and endless loyalty. The tension in the air began to ease. Everyone was tired but relieved, knowing the danger had been eliminated. But deep down, Helen and Daniel understood that what mattered most was Shadow's presence in their lives. He wasn't just a rescue dog. He was an irreplaceable companion, an inseparable part of Emma's healing journey. Through these trials, they realized that the Bennett family wasn't just protected by Shadow. It was his loyalty that helped them find trust in life again, in love, and in unconditional sacrifice. That night's attack seemed to calm down, but the Bennett family couldn't return to their normal lives as they once were. Emma had changed. She no longer lived in the silent, lonely world she once knew. The days of silence had faded, and now Emma was beginning to open up more to her family, even though she still hadn't spoken a word. Helen and Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over them as they watched Emma begin to smile again, no longer distancing herself from the world around her. Every afternoon, when Shadow appeared under the old tree, Emma no longer stood alone. Sometimes she would step outside, stand next to the dog, and gently stroke his thick coat, as if communicating in silence. Those days, the connection between Emma and Shadow became clearer and deeper, and the bond between the girl and the dog grew stronger than ever. However, while the change in Emma brought immense hope, the Bennett family faced a tough decision. Should they continue living in this area or find a safer place for Emma and Shadow? The concerns about security lingered in Helen and Daniel's minds. They feared that one day the neighborhood could face another dangerous situation. They had witnessed attacks from criminals and couldn't be sure that there wouldn't be another threat lurking near their home. Although Shadow had courageously protected Emma and the family, Helen and Daniel couldn't shake the lingering worry about their safety. Helen still couldn't stop worrying about Emma falling back into a state of loneliness if the area wasn't safe. She always thought that a new environment, far from the dangers of their current neighborhood, could help Emma fully recover, both physically and emotionally. But was moving the right solution? Mark came to visit the Bennetts again, and he was the first to help them reconsider their decision. He wasn't just an old friend of Daniel's, he also had experience living through crises, both in and out of life. When Helen and Daniel expressed their worries about whether to leave the neighborhood, Mark shared an important thought. "You know," Mark began, his voice calm but filled with understanding. "So much has changed. Emma has started to open up. She's able to find peace and comfort in Shadow's presence. She's started to find herself again, and her healing process is something very special. Shadow has helped her do that." Mark paused for a moment, as if sensing Helen and Daniel's emotions. He looked at Daniel, who sat in silence, his face thoughtful. "If you leave here, I worry Emma won't find the peace she's found. She's formed a bond with Shadow, and maybe that connection is what will help her overcome anything. This place is where she's found her peace, where Shadow has protected and accompanied her through the hardest days." Helen thought for a moment, but couldn't hide her worry. "But if this area still isn't safe, what can we do? Can we risk leaving her here?" Mark gently shook his head. "Sometimes, avoiding the tough stuff isn't always the solution. We can't avoid all the dangers in life, but one thing's certain. This place, with Shadow, is where Emma has found herself. If you leave, will she continue to progress like she is now? She needs safety and protection, and that's what Shadow gives her. She needs stability, a place with Shadow, where there's love and comfort." Daniel looked at Helen, then over to Mark. He felt the weight of his friend's words, and they truly resonated. He knew Emma had changed, and that change hadn't come just from therapies. It was because of Shadow. Helen and Daniel breathed a sigh of relief as they watched Emma begin to smile again, no longer isolating herself from the world around her. Every afternoon, when Shadow appeared beneath the old tree, Emma no longer stood alone. Sometimes she would step outside, stand next to him, and gently stroke his thick fur, as if having a silent conversation. During these days, the connection between Emma and Shadow grew stronger, their bond deepening in ways they had never imagined. But while Emma's change brought them immense hope, the Bennett family now faced an important decision. Should they stay in this neighborhood or find a safer place for Emma and Shadow? Security concerns still loomed in Helen and Daniel's minds. They feared that, one day, their neighborhood could face a similar danger again. They had witnessed the attacks from the criminal group and couldn't be sure there wouldn't be another threat lurking. Although Shadow had courageously protected Emma and the family, the worry about safety still hadn't been fully erased. Helen couldn't stop worrying about Emma falling back into loneliness if the area wasn't safe. She always believed that a new environment, far from the dangers of their current neighborhood, could help Emma heal completely, not just physically, but mentally. But was moving the right solution? Mark visited the Bennett family again, and he was the first to help them rethink their decision. He wasn't just an old friend of Daniel's, he was someone who had experienced crises, both in life and on the job. When Helen and Daniel expressed their concerns about whether to leave the neighborhood or not, Mark shared an important thought. "You know," Mark began, his voice calm yet full of understanding, "things have already changed a lot. Emma has started to open up, to find peace and comfort in Shadow's presence. She's beginning to find herself again, and her healing process is something very special. Shadow has helped Emma do that." Mark paused for a moment, sensing Helen and Daniel's emotions. He looked at Daniel, who sat quietly, his face thoughtful. "If you leave here, I'm afraid Emma won't find the peace she's found. She's bonded with Shadow, and maybe that connection is what will help her overcome everything. This is where she's found peace, where Shadow has protected and accompanied her through the hardest times." Helen thought for a moment, but couldn't hide the worry in her heart. "But if this area still isn't safe, what can we do? Can we risk leaving her here?" Mark gently shook his head. "Sometimes, avoiding the tough stuff isn't always the solution. We can't avoid all dangers in life, but one thing's for sure. This place, with Shadow, is where Emma found herself. If you leave, will she continue to progress like she is now? She needs safety and protection, and that's what Shadow provides. She needs a stable environment, one with Shadow, one with love and comfort." Daniel looked at Helen, then over to Mark. He felt the weight of his friend's words, and they truly resonated. He knew Emma had changed, and that change wasn't just from therapy. It was because of Shadow. Maybe we don't need to leave. We'll do everything we can to keep Shadow and our family safe. But I also want Emma to keep healing, to not feel anxious anymore," Daniel said softly, his voice filled with determination. Helen nodded, her eyes gentle, and her emotions rising. She looked at Emma, who was playing with Shadow beneath the old tree in the yard. "I think you're right, Mark. Emma needs Shadow, and we need him too. Maybe this is where Emma found herself again." Mark smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "Then, you have your answer. Emma needs this place, with Shadow and with your love." Helen and Daniel realized that no matter how difficult things had been, they couldn't leave Shadow and Emma behind. The bond between them was too strong. Emma had found peace in Shadow's presence and in her family's love. It helped them see that sometimes what they needed was trust in each other, in the invisible ties they couldn't see but that were so clear in their hearts. Over the following days, Emma gradually opened up even more, and the changes in her became more apparent than ever. Shadow continued to be her loyal companion, standing by her side during the peaceful afternoons. Each evening, as the golden sunset bathed the yard, Emma would sit beside Shadow, her hands gently stroking his silky fur. She didn't say a word, but the small smile on her face was enough for Helen and Daniel to feel the happiness Emma was rediscovering. Shadow wasn't just protecting Emma. He was the bridge that allowed her to find joy in the small moments. The dog never forced Emma to speak, but something magical happened whenever they were together. Emma began to find comfort in Shadow's presence, not just as a dog, but as a silent friend who made her feel loved without needing to say a word. Those afternoons, Emma would often sit on the balcony steps, Shadow sitting quietly under the old tree, his eyes always focused on her, as if not wanting her to go anywhere. Helen saw it all, and in her heart, happiness surged. She realized that it was Shadow's presence that Emma needed to rediscover herself. Even though Emma didn't speak, she was opening up, and that was the first sign of her healing. With each passing afternoon, Emma became more open, She started talking to Shadow, though she still couldn't speak, but the gestures, glances, and sometimes the gentle hand-holding showed a significant change. Emma began to find joy in the small things, in the quiet moments spent with Shadow. And Helen felt that her daughter was slowly returning to the world, no longer living in the shell of isolation. The Bennett family noticed the clear difference. Daniel and Helen no longer had to worry when they looked at Emma, and no longer felt helpless when they saw her silent. Shadow had helped Emma through the darkest days, and now her healing was no longer far off. Emma's story of change continued to unfold with every step she took, and every small smile that appeared on her face. The friendship between Emma and Shadow had become priceless, an irreplaceable connection. The dog wasn't just a protector. He was a special companion who helped Emma rediscover trust in herself and the world around her. Helen and Daniel realized that while the healing journey was still ongoing, Shadow would always be there to guide Emma through the dark and into the light of the world around her. Emma's recovery isn't just about therapy, it's about the bond she shares with Shadow. This connection is real, and it's helping her heal in ways words can't explain. Helen and Daniel listened intently, feeling a sense of understanding washing over them. Mark continued, his voice calm but filled with conviction. What you're seeing now, the way Emma's opening up, is because of Shadow. It's not just the dog that's helping her, it's the trust and security she feels when she's with him. Sometimes it's not the therapies or the methods that make the difference. It's the simple, silent presence of someone who truly understands her. Helen glanced at Emma, who was sitting next to Shadow, stroking his fur gently, lost in the peace of the moment. There was a calmness in Emma's eyes, a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. "But Mark," Helen said, her voice tinged with uncertainty, "what if Emma becomes too dependent on Shadow? What if, without him, she regresses? I'm scared that we might be stunting her growth." Mark smiled softly, understanding her concerns. "I hear you, Helen, but let me tell you this. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing we can lean on someone. Shadow isn't just a crutch. He's a foundation for Emma. He's helping her rebuild the trust and love she needs to face the world again. But that doesn't mean she won't grow beyond him. It means he's giving her the stability she needs to take those first steps." Daniel, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke up. "So, you're saying we don't need to worry that Emma's becoming too reliant on Shadow? That he's not holding her back, but actually helping her move forward?" Mark nodded. "Exactly. It's all about balance. Shadow's presence is part of her healing process. But as she grows, she'll find her own strength. And with Shadow by her side, Emma will have the courage to step out into the world again when she's ready." Helen sighed, a weight lifting off her shoulders. She looked at Daniel, and they exchanged a glance filled with understanding. They both knew that they were at a crossroads, but Mark's words had given them the clarity they needed. "You're right," Helen said softly. "Emma needs Shadow. But we also need to trust that she'll keep growing. We can't protect her from everything, but we can be there for her as she learns to stand on her own." Daniel reached for Helen's hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll keep doing what's best for Emma. We'll make sure she has everything she needs, including Shadow, to help her heal." As Mark left their home, the Bennett family stood together, looking out at Emma and Shadow, side by side under the old tree. The bond between them was undeniable, and in that moment, they knew that Emma was not only finding her way back to the world, but that she was doing it with the love and support of both her family and her loyal companion. Shadow was more than just a dog. He was the protector, the guide, and the friend who would help Emma take each step toward healing, no matter how small or slow that journey might be. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Shadow at her side, Emma had the strength to face whatever came next. Helen and Daniel stood there, watching Emma and Shadow under the old tree, a sense of disbelief and joy overwhelming them. They had never imagined they would see this day. Emma, once locked in a world of silence, was now speaking the name of the dog who had been by her side through everything. The simple act of calling Shadow's name was a monumental step in her healing, a step they had longed for but had never quite known how to achieve. Shadow sat still beside Emma, his eyes soft yet intense with the quiet, unwavering devotion he had always offered. His tail gave a gentle wag, as though acknowledging the moment, a silent, mutual understanding between the two. There was no grand gesture, no need for words. Emma and Shadow shared something deeper, a connection that transcended speech, one of unconditional love and protection. The gentle breeze ruffled the leaves above them, creating a soft rustle that seemed to carry a sense of peace. For the first time in a long while, the world felt calm for Emma. The silence that had once been so heavy around her was now filled with a quiet understanding. Shadow had never pressured her to speak, yet here they were, in the stillness, in the quiet exchange of glances, and Emma had found her voice again. Helen and Daniel exchanged looks, their hearts swelling with emotion. They could hardly believe what they had just witnessed. Helen's eyes filled with tears as she silently thanked the universe for bringing Shadow into their lives. This moment was everything they had hoped for, but it was more than that. It was a turning point. Emma wasn't just reconnecting with Shadow, she was reconnecting with the world. As Daniel watched Emma call out to Shadow, his chest filled with relief. There was no more doubt in his mind about Emma's healing process. She was talking, not in the traditional sense, but the fact that she had found the courage to speak, to reach out in her own way, was a victory for Emma, for them as parents, and for Shadow. Daniel felt the weight lift off his shoulders, knowing that the bond between Emma and Shadow wasn't something fragile. It was something built on years of silent understanding. Shadow had never left Emma's side. The dog had been her anchor, her protector. And now, as Emma began to open up to the world again, Shadow would continue to be the quiet strength that kept her grounded. As Emma and Shadow sat together under the tree, surrounded by the fading light of the evening, the family knew the journey was far from over. But in this moment, they found peace. Shadow had helped Emma reclaim a part of herself that seemed lost, and for that the family would forever be grateful. Emma might not have said everything she needed to, but what she had just done, speaking the name of her friend, was a powerful step forward. Shadow had been the bridge that led her out of the darkness, and as long as he was by her side, Emma would continue to walk the path toward healing. It was no longer just about survival. It was about living, about trusting again, and above all, about the love and loyalty that would carry them all forward. Shadow, in his quiet way, had given Emma a voice, and that, more than anything, was the most precious gift of all. The moment Emma called Shadow's name, it was like a door opening in her soul. Helen and Daniel didn't speak, but they could feel a monumental shift in Emma's heart. No longer was she the silent girl, the one who retreated into her own world. Now, Emma was beginning to find her voice again, both physically and emotionally. Shadow stood beside her, not needing to do anything more. The mission was complete. Emma had found the comfort, protection, and unconditional love that Shadow brought. And that was the foundation for her healing, a first step on a long journey ahead. From that moment on, Emma was no longer silent, no longer afraid. Shadow had helped her take firm steps forward, and this dog, this loyal companion, had become a crucial part of her life. Day by day, she regained her voice, not just through simple words, but with the confidence and hope that had long been buried in the silence of her world. Every passing day, she felt more at peace inside, thanks to Shadow, the silent protector who walked alongside her through this difficult journey. The Bennett family had weathered so many storms, but now they found peace. Though Helen and Daniel still had some lingering worries about Emma's future, they realized that Shadow's presence was the key factor in Emma's change. Helen felt a sense of relief she hadn't known before, seeing her daughter becoming more open and happy. Daniel no longer feared that Emma would be trapped in silence forever. With Shadow by her side, he knew his daughter would overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. Their life was no longer a string of anxious days, but quiet moments spent together. Helen and Daniel knew that even though things weren't perfect, the love and protection they shared, alongside Shadow's unwavering presence, created a solid foundation to face any future trials. The change in Emma wasn't just a physical recovery, it was a transformation of her spirit. She no longer felt lonely. She had found a true friend, a protector in Shadow. After everything they had been through, the Bennetts decided they would stay in Woodside Grove. Despite security concerns and the neighborhood's past struggles, they realized that Shadow had played a pivotal role in Emma's healing. Leaving this place might disrupt her recovery. As here, with Shadow by her side, Emma had learned to open her heart again and trust in life once more. Helen and Daniel decided to host a small ceremony to thank Shadow for everything he had done for Emma and their family. Emma was the one who suggested it, smiling gently as she said to her mother, "We need to thank Shadow for everything he's done for me." Helen and Daniel were deeply moved by Emma's simple yet profound words. The ceremony was held on a beautiful afternoon, as the gentle sunlight bathed the Bennett garden. Close neighbors, those who had witnessed Emma's difficult journey, came to join. They gathered around Shadow, offering words of gratitude and warm hugs. Helen and Daniel presented Shadow with a small medal, a token of their deep appreciation for the protection and loyalty he had shown their family. In that moment, when Emma called Shadow's name, it felt like a door opening deep within her soul. Helen and Daniel didn't speak, but they could feel the shift in Emma's heart, a monumental change. No longer was she the silent girl who withdrew into herself. Emma was beginning to find her voice, both physically and emotionally. Shadow stood quietly beside her, not needing to do anything more. His mission had been accomplished. Emma had found comfort, protection, and unconditional love in him. That love became the foundation for her healing, her first step on a long journey ahead. From that moment on, Emma was no longer silent or afraid. Shadow had helped her take her first firm steps forward, and this loyal companion was now an integral part of her life. Day by day, Emma was finding her voice again, not just through simple words, but with the confidence and hope that had long been buried under the silence she once lived in. With each passing day, she felt more at peace, thanks to Shadow, the silent protector walking beside her on this difficult path. The Bennett family had weathered so many storms, but now they found themselves at peace. Although Helen and Daniel still carried some worries about Emma's future, they realized that Shadow's presence was the key to her transformation. Helen felt a warmth she hadn't known before, seeing her daughter open up and smile again. Daniel no longer feared that Emma would be trapped in silence forever. With Shadow by her side, he knew she would overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. Their life was no longer a series of anxious days, but peaceful moments spent together. Helen and Daniel understood that, although things were far from perfect, the love and protection they shared and the unwavering presence of Shadow had created a solid foundation to face any future trials. Emma's change wasn't just physical, it was a transformation of her spirit. She no longer felt alone. She had found a true friend in Shadow. After everything they had gone through, the Bennetts decided to stay in Woodside Grove. Despite the security concerns and the neighborhood's history of sudden troubles, They realized that Shadow had played a pivotal role in Emma's recovery. Leaving this place might disrupt her healing, because here, with Shadow, Emma had found herself again, and learned to trust the world once more. Helen and Daniel decided to host a small ceremony to thank Shadow for everything he had done for Emma and their family. Emma was the one who suggested it, smiling gently as she said to her mother, "We need to thank Shadow for everything he's done for me." Helen and Daniel were deeply moved by Emma's simple yet profound words. The ceremony was held on a beautiful afternoon, as the soft sunlight bathed the Bennett garden. Close neighbors, those who had witnessed Emma's difficult journey, came to join. They gathered around Shadow, offering words of gratitude and warm hugs. Helen and Daniel presented Shadow with a small medal, a token of their deep appreciation for the protection and loyalty he had shown their family. One day, a loyal German shepherd found himself abandoned in a life-or-death situation. In a split second, he made a choice no one expected. He saved his owner, the one person he loved more than anything. But his sacrifice didn't end there. His act of heroism was just the beginning of a story about love, loyalty, and sacrifice that goes beyond words. This isn't just a dog's story. It's about the lengths love will go to. It's a moment that will stay with you, one that'll hit you deep. What happened next? You won't believe it. Ethan walked down the empty road, each step echoing in the stillness. The summer heat couldn't soften the ache inside him. He was a man alone now, no more firefighting, no more urgent rescue calls, no more rushing around, living on adrenaline. Everything was just silence, just stillness. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt this empty. It had been 3 years since the accident. 3 years since the fire took everything, his health, his job, everything he loved. The accident on a rescue mission left him unable to do the work he had always cherished. His body couldn't keep up anymore. His legs no longer had the strength to run like before, and his back ached constantly, unable to handle any strain. Once, he had been a hero in the eyes of so many, always ready to rush into danger to save others. But now, he was just a man trapped in the shadows of his past. The faces of teammates lost in the fire haunted him every night. He blamed himself for not doing more, for not being able to save them, even though he had done everything he could. His steps were heavy, but he kept walking, as if searching for something, any kind of hope in his life. This empty road had become his routine every morning. He didn't really want to walk, but didn't know what else to do. Day after day, his life continued, mundane and silent. Suddenly, a soft breeze brushed against his face, carrying the scent of wildflowers. Ethan caught a hint of something fresh in the air, but it wasn't enough to lift the heaviness inside him. He looked up at the vast blue sky, but found no hope in it. No matter how wide the sky was, the suffocating emptiness in his heart remained. In that moment, walking alone on that empty road, Ethan realized he couldn't live in this loneliness forever. He needed a reason to keep going, something to live for, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find any light in the darkness of his own soul. The unease and isolation felt like they were closing in on him, impossible to escape. He kept walking, but still, he hadn't found the answer to his own questions. Everything seemed to fall into an endless void, and he was just a lost soul in the world, a man who had lost so much and didn't know how to find himself again. It was no different from the days Ethan had lived for the past 3 years, just an endless loop of loneliness and being lost. His steps slowed when he noticed something strange by the side of the road. An old cardboard box, tilted and buried in the grass, as though it had been discarded long ago. At first, Ethan thought it was just garbage, a useless scrap someone didn't want to look at anymore. But as he drew closer, he heard a faint sound, like a soft breath or a whimper, something pleading for help. Ethan stopped, a sudden shift in his heart. He crouched down and took a closer look at the box. The cardboard was stained, weathered from the rain, and covered in dust. But what caught his eye were the faint stains of blood, still fresh on the corner of the box. He slowly opened the flaps, and immediately the sight of 7 German Shepherd puppies appeared before him. The puppies were curled up inside, so cramped they could only huddle together like little balls. Their eyes were wide open, filled with fear and hunger, but their frail little bodies couldn't move, couldn't cry out for help. These puppies, no older than a month, were skin and bones, their fur tangled and filthy. They were hungry, exhausted, lying motionless as if they had no strength to go on. One of the puppies weakly lifted its head, its bright eyes looking up at Ethan, full of panic. A soft whimper escaped its lips, a cry as faint as a plea for help. Ethan's heart twisted in his chest. Somewhere in the eyes of these tiny souls, he saw himself, someone who had stood on the edge of hopelessness and loneliness, and now, in this moment, he knew he couldn't walk away. He knelt beside the box, his hands trembling as he carefully lifted the puppies out. One of them started to cough violently, its weak breaths gasping for air in the heavy atmosphere. The other puppies remained still, some unable to respond at all. In their eyes was exhaustion, but there was also a flicker of hope, as if calling out for help, the last breath of life still alive in their tiny bodies. Ethan's heart felt like it was being squeezed. He couldn't let these lives fade away in silence. He looked around. No one was there to help. Everything felt like it was too late. But one thing was certain. He couldn't walk away. These puppies needed him, and he wouldn't leave them behind. They were fragile but resilient, just like he had been when he fought to survive his own life. Ethan stood up, cradling the puppies in his jacket. With each step, the anxiety grew, but so did his determination. He didn't know what he'd do next, but one thing he knew for sure, he wouldn't let them die. Not under this harsh sun. Not when he could do something. "Don't worry," he whispered, even though he wasn't sure they could hear him. "I'll help you." He couldn't turn back. He couldn't just leave as if nothing had happened. He decided he would take them somewhere safe. Do everything he could to help them survive, even if it meant giving up the important work he had promised to do. He looked down at the puppies in his arms, their fragile bodies barely able to move. Each breath they took was a cry for help, a desperate plea for life that Ethan couldn't ignore. These puppies had nothing but the fragility of life itself and the vulnerability of their youth. And here he was, making a decision that would change everything. The internal struggle inside Ethan grew stronger. He had promised to be on time to help a rescue organization today. They had trusted him. But now, here he stood, at a crossroads, unsure of what to do. The lives of these tiny beings were worth more than any job. But he also couldn't neglect his responsibilities. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a call from Jared, the one who had arranged to meet him for work. Ethan stared at the screen, feeling the weight of the moment. This call could be his only chance to secure a stable job, to keep surviving. But if he answered it, if he left now, the puppies would be left to suffer in their loneliness and pain once more. A part of him wanted to pick up the phone and say he'd be there, not wanting to miss the opportunity. But a bigger part of him held him back. He couldn't leave these puppies in this condition. They were too weak to care for themselves. And him, he hadn't been able to save his teammates in the fire before. He couldn't let that happen again, not with these fragile creatures. "All right," Ethan whispered to himself, looking at the puppies in his arms. "I'll do the right thing." He took a deep breath, feeling as though a heavy weight had been lifted from his chest. His wife, Deborah's voice echoed in his mind from the final days she had spent with him. If you see someone in need of help, don't turn away. Don't walk away. You were born to help, not to hide. Those words were a powerful reminder, helping Ethan find the strength he needed within himself. He knew he had to continue living by the ideals he once believed in. He couldn't abandon these puppies. He was a firefighter, always rushing into danger to save others. And now, he had to do the same for these fragile lives. The anxiety settled over Ethan as he drove to the veterinary clinic. Each movement seemed to slow down, his mind spinning with questions. Would the puppies survive? Would he be able to help them? He didn't know what else he could do except hope. Bringing the 7 puppies to safety was the right choice, but he couldn't help but worry about their future. The clinic was at the end of the road, nestled next to a quiet neighborhood in Pinebrook. When Ethan parked, he glanced at the puppies in the back seat. They were lying still, their eyes dull as they gazed out the window, their bodies tired and weak. He carefully took each puppy out of the car, wrapping them in his coat, just like he had done before, protecting them from the cold and whatever dangers lurked around them. Dr. Amelia, the vet, greeted him warmly. She was a middle-aged woman with long brown hair and kind eyes, always calm and professional in her work. She looked at the puppies, and after examining them, gently told Ethan, "They're too weak, Ethan. One of them may not make it, but we'll do everything we can to help them." A wave of helplessness washed over Ethan. He looked at the puppies, the fragile little lives lying on the examination table with their thin backs and dirty fur. Every breath they took was a battle to keep going. Ethan felt his heart constrict. He had tried everything, but it seemed like everything was beyond his control. It felt like he was standing on the edge, not knowing what to do next. Dr. Amelia continued, "They need special care. We need to hydrate them, give them medication to help them regain strength. But only time will tell if they can make it through." Ethan looked at the puppies, their tiny heads drooping. He didn't want to think about the possibility that one of them might not survive. But that fear lingered in his chest. He didn't know what else to do but hope. Hope that they would overcome the hardships. Hope that he could save them. Hope that his decision wouldn't be in vain. At that moment, one of the puppies let out a soft whimper, making Ethan flinch. He bent down, gently stroking it, feeling it try to push itself up, though so weak. "I'll be here," he whispered. "I'll help you. Don't worry." Dr. Amelia approached, her eyes full of sympathy. "You've done all you can. Now let us take care of them. Let us do our part." Ethan nodded, feeling a little lighter from her words. But the worry still clung to him. These puppies, no matter how fragile, needed him, and he had decided he would not abandon them. Every life, no matter how small, had value. And now, he wasn't going to let that happen again. "We'll need to monitor their condition over the next few days," Dr. Amelia said, looking at the puppies being cared for. "They need medication, fluids, and some other support therapies. But only time will tell if they have the strength to pull through." Ethan looked at each one, their tiny faces, big, fearful eyes full of weakness. He felt that fear, not just in their eyes, but in himself, too. Could he be strong enough to help them? Could he save all of them? Everything was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to give up. Ethan sat down beside one puppy, its tiny body shivering as it panted, eyes closed. He gently placed his hand on its head, feeling its weakness with every breath it took. "I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He looked around the room, realizing that in this moment, this place was not just a veterinary clinic. It was a crucial part of his journey. It was where he had found a purpose again, where he could use his patience and love to help these little lives. A sense of responsibility rose within him. He knew that, no matter what the outcome, He wasn't going to let them suffer alone. In the days that followed, Ethan never left the clinic. He stayed by the puppies' side, preparing food for them, helping the vets administer medicine and fluids. Each day that passed, he saw a flicker of hope in their eyes. Despite their fragile condition, one thing was certain: they were no longer alone. And neither was he. These little lives had given him a new reason to keep fighting. From the moments he cradled them, from the times he felt their fragile bodies against his own, Ethan realized this was his chance to heal, not just for them, but for himself too. He knew caring for these puppies wouldn't be easy. He'd have to fight against the helplessness he felt when one of them might not survive. But he couldn't let worry stop him. Every day he stayed, every moment spent with them was a step forward in his own journey of rebirth. The anxiety still lingered, but now Ethan understood that doing the right thing didn't always come with a guaranteed outcome. Every decision, no matter how hard, was worth it if it gave life to these fragile beings. Ethan made up his mind, no matter what happened, he would stay and help these puppies. As the days went by, the puppies slowly began to recover. Some of them started moving a little, others opened their eyes and looked at him, no longer filled with fear, but curiosity. Each small sign of progress, no matter how insignificant, felt like a victory to Ethan. His heart felt a little lighter. He wasn't just saving these puppies, he was saving himself, one step at a time. Ethan sat beside their bed, looking into their eyes, and he could feel it. They needed him. These puppies, though weak and tired, showed a resilience he never expected. Looking at them, he suddenly realized something. No matter how meaningless his own life might feel, helping others was something worth cherishing. These puppies had taught him that love wasn't always about what you get in return. Sometimes, it's just about giving. He couldn't help but think about the past, about his days as a firefighter, about all the lives he saved. Back then, he always felt he had a clear purpose. But when the accident happened, everything fell apart. He was no longer the one saving people. He had no clear reason to live anymore. But now, looking at these puppies, he understood his new purpose: to help them, to give them a chance at life, just like he had once done for others. The feeling of sacrifice, though difficult, even painful at times, made him feel truly alive again. He realized that love isn't just about giving without expecting anything in return. Love is when you accept the sacrifice of yourself so others can live. And through this journey, he was learning to love himself again. As he watched the puppies begin to heal, he noticed the wounds in his own heart starting to close. He wasn't just saving these puppies. He was saving a part of himself that he had lost. These little creatures taught him how to face the past, how to reckon with his mistakes, and how to forgive himself. Ethan realized that, despite his organization still being small, it was a step in the right direction. He hadn't given up. He had dared to stand up and do something meaningful. His organization not only rescued abandoned and abused German shepherds, but it had also helped him find a purpose again, a reason to wake up every morning and fight for these little lives. But what he hadn't expected was that, in helping these dogs, he would find a new family, a family not just of humans, but of puppies too. Ethan sat beside the kennel of the 7 puppies, gazing at them with a tender look in his eyes. They had started to recover. Their fur no longer caked with dirt and stains. They were eating well and slowly regaining their strength. But what surprised Ethan the most was the change in each of their personalities. Each one had a unique character, despite having the same origin, abandoned and weak. But they didn't respond to humans or the world around them in the same way. The largest one, with light golden fur, always displayed strength and confidence. Ethan decided to call it Bramble for its resilient nature. It was always the leader of the pack, the first to venture out and explore the world around it. Even though its body was still fragile, Bramble showed courage, as if it knew it had to protect its siblings. The next puppy, darker in color and more reserved, always quietly observed everything around it. Ethan named it Midnight. Midnight preferred to find a quiet corner where it could lay still and think. It didn't like noise. But when needed, Midnight was always ready to stand by and protect its pack. Midnight's calm demeanor made Ethan appreciate the patience and gentleness it brought to the group. There was another puppy with big, round eyes, always looking at Ethan as if it wanted to be held and loved. This puppy had soft, slightly curly fur, and Ethan called it Sunny because of the bright, joyful look it gave him every time they made eye contact. Sunny was always the first to run to Ethan when he approached the kennel, wagging its tail without stopping. It exuded happiness just by being around others, as if it trusted completely those who had saved it. Another puppy, more timid, often huddled with its siblings when someone approached. It wouldn't come close to Ethan immediately, but its eyes were always filled with longing and hope. Ethan named it Whisper, for its gentle nature and quietness. Whisper seemed afraid to be alone, but as it was cared for, it began to open up, slowly regaining trust in humans. There was a puppy with cream-colored fur and long ears, always seeming ready to play. It loved running around the yard, playing with the other dogs. Ethan called it Scout because of its adventurous spirit and love for exploration. Scout wasn't afraid of challenges, always rushing after anything new, and was always the first to leave its mark on every little journey. Lastly, there was a puppy with shiny black fur and sharp eyes, though there was a hidden anxiety beneath the surface. This one kept its distance from everyone. It rarely came close, but when Ethan looked into its eyes, he could sense a deep intelligence and understanding of the world. Ethan named it Flint, like a spark, full of potential, but needing care and nurturing to become strong. Flint was quiet, but in Ethan's eyes, it was a warrior in the making. As Ethan observed the changes in each of them, he couldn't help but feel a deep connection. These puppies, each with their own unique personalities and histories, had become his family. Together, they were healing. Him as much as them. And in helping them, Ethan realized that perhaps this was the family he had been searching for all along. Finally, there was the smallest, weakest puppy in the group, with delicate fur and dull eyes, often lying still, barely moving. But its eyes always looked at Ethan with patience and silent affection. This puppy had endured the hardest days, and Ethan decided to name it Hope, for it was the small hope he found in his journey of rescuing these puppies. Hope represented Ethan's belief, the reason he decided not to give up. Each name Ethan gave the puppies wasn't just a simple label. It was a mark of the deep connection he had built with them. He could feel that each dog had its own story, its own journey, and now they had found this safe place to start anew. They were no longer abandoned dogs, no longer fragile creatures, but resilient warriors, loyal companions in Ethan's new life. Ethan sat beside them, feeling as though he was witnessing the formation of a new family. Despite having suffered deep wounds, they were now starting to regain their strength and were no longer afraid. He looked into their eyes full of gratitude, and in that moment he felt the profound bond between himself and them. To him, these puppies weren't just innocent beings he had saved. They were friends, family he had been missing for so long. As each day passed, the puppies slowly recovered. Bramble, Midnight, Sunny, Whisper, Scout, Flint, and Hope, each one had a distinct change. Bramble was always at the forefront, constantly exploring the wide yard Ethan had built for them. Midnight preferred to lie quietly under a tree, its eyes still thoughtful, but no longer filled with fear. Sunny was still the cheerful one, always running up to Ethan with wagging tail whenever he approached. The other puppies, too, slowly regained their health and vitality. They began to show their unique personalities, as if this new life had given them a chance to grow. Ethan felt the change not only in the puppies, but also within himself. The memories of Deborah, his wife, still lingered in his mind. He couldn't forget the happy moments with her, couldn't forget her smile when she looked at him in those early days of their life together. Those memories were still there, like wounds that hadn't healed in his heart. But when he looked at these puppies, Ethan realized he was starting to move past the pain. He no longer felt the emptiness and loneliness he had before. Instead, he felt a new hope slowly growing inside him. Ethan began to realize that caring for these puppies wasn't just about helping them recover. It was a journey of healing for himself. Each puppy was a story, a life that needed love and protection. And as he gave them love and care, he was also healing the wounds in his own heart. He couldn't change the past, couldn't bring Deborah back, but he could do something meaningful in the present for the lives that needed him. One afternoon, as he sat beside the puppy's kennel, Ethan felt a warmth in his heart, something entirely different from the coldness he had experienced before. He looked at the puppies lying peacefully, their eyes no longer filled with fear, but with calm and a sense of safety. He felt that he had completed an important part of his journey. Caring for these puppies had given him a new purpose, a reason to keep living and hoping. From the early days, when all he could see in these little lives was weakness and pain, Clay now saw resilience and hidden strength within them. And in their journey of recovery, Clay realized that he, too, was on his own path of healing. The painful past would always be a part of him, but his present and future weren't defined by what had passed. They were being shaped, step by step, with these new companions, his loyal little warriors in this new chapter of his life. Though the memories of Deborah remained, Clay knew he couldn't live forever in the shadows of the past. He had to keep going, to live, to love. And with every dog he saved, he felt himself gaining strength to keep moving forward. Over the past days, as he witnessed the recovery of the puppies, he realized he, too, was healing. Though the road ahead was still long, at least now he had found a reason to walk it. One morning, while cleaning up the kennels, Clay received a call he hadn't expected. On the other end of the line was Sarah, an old friend he hadn't seen in years. Sarah was someone Clay had known during his rescue days. She was passionate, always active in animal rescue efforts, and had supported many animal welfare organizations. When she heard about Clay's small rescue organization, she immediately offered her help. "Hey Clay, long time no see. I heard you've started an animal rescue organization, right?" Sarah asked, her voice warm yet full of energy. "I'd love to support you. Maybe I can connect you with some animal grant organizations. Starting a small rescue isn't easy, but with some help, you can do so much more." Hearing Sarah's words, Clay felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had been struggling with so many financial challenges lately, from buying food for the dogs to building the infrastructure for his rescue. The mounting expenses had made him feel like he was battling a storm that wouldn't let up. But now, with Sarah's help, a glimmer of hope began to shine through. He realized he wasn't in this alone. "Thank you, Sarah," Clay said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I honestly don't know what I would have done without this support. You've already helped me so much." Sarah chuckled lightly, her voice full of encouragement. "Don't thank me, Clay. We've been friends for a long time. I'm really happy to see you doing good work for these dogs. I'll help you connect with some funding organizations, and if you need anything else, just call me. I won't let you fight this battle alone." The relief Clay felt grew stronger. He knew this was a turning point for his organization. Getting financial support would allow him to expand the rescue facility, care for the dogs better, and save even more lives. Clay immediately started working on the connections Sarah had suggested. She helped him reach out to animal protection funds and charitable organizations that specialized in supporting animal rescue centers. Calls, emails, and online meetings followed for days. With each positive response from these organizations, Clay's heart grew lighter. Step by step, his Pine Brook German Shepherd rescue began to receive more attention and support, slowly becoming a respected rescue organization in the community. The first financial support began to come in, and Clay was able to use it to improve the facilities, from building additional kennels to hiring staff to help care for the dogs. The extra funding also allowed him to provide nutritious food for the puppies, helping them recover more quickly. As he saw things starting to change, Clay felt a deep sense of joy and satisfaction. The long, hard days filled with worry and exhaustion were now being rewarded. Sarah's support, along with the attention from various organizations, had opened up a huge opportunity for him and his rescue organization. Clay realized that this journey wasn't just a battle for financial resources, it was about connecting with the community, seeking help, and finding solidarity. He wasn't alone on this path. And it was with the help of friends and passionate organizations that Clay felt he wasn't just rescuing German Shepherds, but creating a network of support, a community that helped each other in the toughest times. The relief of receiving help from Sarah and the organizations made Clay feel as though he wasn't alone anymore. He understood that his organization wasn't just him, it also had the support of friends and organizations sharing his mission. However, that joy was quickly replaced with worry. While the grants were much needed, they still weren't enough to solve all the financial issues the organization faced. The costs of caring for the puppies, feeding, medical bills, and treatment were rising, and Clay knew that unless he found a way to stabilize the finances, the organization wouldn't survive. Clay sat at his desk, an old wooden table covered with papers, plans, letters from funding organizations, and medical bills for the puppies. He looked at each invoice, each number, and a deep sense of stress rose within him. Every penny spent felt like he was getting closer to the edge. He had never realized how much funding was needed to run an animal rescue operation. Maintaining a small rescue organization like this was not just a battle with the challenges of animal care, but also with numbers he couldn't control. As each month passed, Clay found himself constantly worrying about how to gather enough money to keep the operation going. The costs for food, medicine, veterinary bills for the puppies, and repairs to the facilities kept piling up. Even though he worked harder, organized more fundraising campaigns, and sought grants from other organizations, there were times when he felt helpless. During these days, he could only hope to make it through another day without facing failure. At night, Clay stayed up not because of the work, but because of worry. He looked at the puppies lying quietly in their kennels, tired but full of hope. It felt as though these tiny lives were waiting for him to do something to help them. He couldn't let them down, couldn't let them go back to the cold, lonely world they had come from. Over the past days, he had done everything he could to care for them, to help them heal. And he couldn't give up on them, even though he knew things were getting harder. One afternoon, while inspecting the kennels, Clay received a call from a funding organization he had applied to for assistance. He picked up the phone, hoping for good news, but when he heard the voice on the other end, his heart sank. "We're sorry, Clay. We're currently unable to—" Clay hung up the phone, feeling the weight of disappointment settle in. On the other end, the voice had told him they couldn't provide more funding. "Your organization has potential," they had said, "but our current financial situation isn't looking good either." He stared at the puppies, happily running around, oblivious to the struggles he was facing. A deep sense of fatigue washed over him. He wondered if he could keep going. But just then, the puppies came running to him, wagging their tails and looking up at him with trusting eyes. He felt a powerful connection to them, as if they were reminding him that he couldn't give up. No matter how tough things got, he had to keep going. Those thoughts pushed Clay to stand up, deciding he wouldn't let himself fall in the face of this challenge. He understood that giving up wasn't an option, no matter how hard things got. These puppies trusted him, and he wouldn't let them down. As he thought about solutions to his financial struggles, he looked at the puppies slowly recovering, and all his worries seemed to fade. Each day, their improving health was a small victory he felt deeply. He no longer felt stressed about the bills, the calls from funding organizations, because those things no longer mattered as much as seeing the puppies getting stronger, playing, and wagging their tails when he came near. He watched Bramble, the largest of the puppies, standing strong on its legs, wagging its tail and jumping around every time Clay entered the room. No longer the weak, motionless creature from the cardboard box, Bramble had become an energetic dog, eager to explore the world around it, a symbol of life and resilience. Seeing its joy made Clay's heart swell with happiness. That was the clearest sign of recovery, and that recovery was also a sign of the rebirth in his own heart. Midnight, the puppy with dark fur, always kept its distance, but now it was starting to open up. It no longer lay still but began running around the yard Clay had set up for them. Each time Clay called, Midnight would look at him, its eyes no longer filled with fear, but with anticipation and trust. Clay knew that his patience and love had helped Midnight regain its trust in humans. He realized that he wasn't just saving these dogs, he was also helping them find hope again. Sunny, with its bright eyes and soft fur, was still the happiest and most playful. Every time Clay walked into the room, Sunny ran to him, wagging its tail as though it wanted to jump up and hug him. Its eyes were full of gratitude, as though it understood that everything it had now was because of the care and love Clay had given it. Clay smiled at Sunny, feeling all the stress inside him dissolve with a single wag of its tail. The smallest of the puppies, Hope, the weakest one, was also recovering. It started moving more strongly, its eyes brightening, and its long ears perked up when Clay approached. Every step Hope took was a sign of life. Clay couldn't help but think about his past, the things he had lost, and the people he couldn't save. But looking at Hope, he realized that no matter how hard life got, every life had value, and he couldn't give up. These puppies were proof of that. A sense of peace gradually filled Clay's heart. He realized that even though his organization was still small and financial struggles were still there, these puppies were the reason he woke up every morning. They were the reason he kept going, the reason he continued to fight. Their progress, their recovery, it was all a reminder of the purpose he had found. And in helping them, he was also helping himself heal. Clay realized that, despite the difficulties, these puppies had given him a new purpose, a reason to wake up each morning. It wasn't just about saving them, it was about finding himself again and rediscovering his belief in life. He looked at the puppies and felt a new sense of hope in his heart. Each recovery, each step forward they made was a lesson in strength and resilience, a reminder that no matter the challenges we face, as long as we don't give up, we will always find a way forward. He no longer felt alone. Each puppy was a part of the new family he had created, and that gave Clay a renewed faith in life. But just as he began to feel the peace and hope from these small creatures, an intense tremor suddenly shook everything around him. That morning, as Clay was feeding the puppies, a powerful quake struck, shaking the entire room. Clay stumbled to his feet, immediately hearing the loud crash of objects toppling, glass shattering, and the roar of earth and debris. The ground seemed to writhe beneath him, the walls around him trembling, and suddenly everything seemed to fall into chaos. Never before had Clay felt such fear. Each tremor made him feel as if he were losing control. The puppies, in a panic, wagged their tails and cried out in fear. Clay rushed over, pulling them close, trying to calm them while the walls around them seemed ready to collapse. The sound of glass shattering, stones tumbling from above, filled the air with a heavy, suffocating tension. It felt like a nightmare he couldn't escape. Once the earthquake subsided, Clay hurried to check the puppies. Thankfully, they weren't injured, but in their eyes, he saw the fear and confusion. Clay took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "It's okay. Everything will be fine," he whispered, even though he wasn't sure he could control the situation. He ran outside, where sunlight was starting to peek through the dark clouds, but the scene around him was anything but peaceful. Buildings in Pinebrook were severely damaged, crumbled walls, tilting houses, and streets cracked wide open. The area was in ruins, with people running from their homes, seeking shelter. Screams, calls for loved ones, and the wail of fire engines echoed from all directions. The air was thick, suffocating, and the urgency of the situation was clear. Though his mind was still reeling, Clay quickly focused. He was a former firefighter, and now was the time to put everything he had learned into action. He immediately contacted his rescue team, quickly planning how to aid those trapped in the affected areas. A sense of worry and tension filled him as he thought about the people stuck in the rubble. The urgency of it all pushed him to act fast. He had to save those who needed him. Clay hurried to inspect nearby areas with his rescue team, searching for survivors in the collapsed buildings. Each step, each corner they checked, presented new challenges. Large concrete slabs, broken bricks, and twisted steel beams blocked their paths, making movement difficult and dangerous. Yet Clay's determination and the resilience of his team didn't waver. He tried not to let the anxiety overwhelm him, focusing on the next step, on saving as many lives as possible of chaos and danger. Clay knew that with his loyal German shepherds by his side, they were more than just companions. They were an irreplaceable part of the rescue team. One of the cries for help came from beneath a collapsed house. Clay and a rescue team quickly approached. The tension in the air was palpable as they saw civilians trapped under the rubble, unable to free themselves. Without hesitation, Clay directed the team to quickly find a way to help them. He pushed aside all his concerns about his own safety, because in moments like this, he couldn't stop. People needed him, and he wouldn't give up. Every second felt like an eternity. The world around them was in chaos, but Clay knew he couldn't let fear take control. Because, in these moments, he was the only one who could help. He couldn't let worry or exhaustion stop him. He knew that every second that passed was another life at risk. While the rescue team worked to break through the layers of debris, Clay noticed the importance of his German shepherds. They weren't just loyal companions. They were vital rescue tools in this emergency. Clay saw Bramble, the largest dog in the group, standing before the rubble, its sharp eyes scanning every corner. Bramble wasn't just a strong dog. It was a companion who knew exactly when to act. When Clay signaled, Bramble immediately dove into the debris, skillfully maneuvering through gaps, searching for survivors. At the same time, Midnight, the more reserved and cautious dog, moved silently near the fallen buildings, sniffing through the wreckage, searching for signs of life. While Midnight wasn't the loudest dog in the group, Clay knew that in these situations, it was the most reliable. Midnight's sharp eyes and careful movements made Clay trust it completely. When Midnight signaled to him, Clay immediately knew it had found a clue. Sunny, the small but enthusiastic dog, was running circles around the search area, its eyes sparkling with curiosity and eagerness. Though Sunny didn't have the strength of Bramble, it was always the first to dive in, exploring places other dogs couldn't reach. Clay's trust in Sunny grew as he saw it, quickly discover an area buried under rubble. With Sonny's guidance, the rescue team quickly arrived and freed a man trapped beneath a large stone. The other German shepherds were also involved in the search, each with its own role. Whisper, the dog who often sought quiet, had a remarkable ability to listen for the faintest sounds. Clay saw it standing near a pile of fallen bricks, ears pricked, eyes scanning every slight movement. Whisper never missed any sign of a survivor. Clay stood to the side, watching his dog's work. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride swell within him. These German shepherds weren't just companions. They were true soldiers in this fight for survival. With all their strength and intelligence, they were helping him find survivors, while humans struggled to overcome obstacles that couldn't be cleared quickly. In each stride of Bramble, in each tail wag of Sonny, in every careful step of Midnight, Clay could see their importance in this rescue mission. They weren't just helping physically, they were helping keep his spirits strong. Even as the rescue team faced countless challenges and the mounting pressure of the situation, the dog's unwavering dedication reminded him that no matter how difficult the road ahead, they were in this together more. His heart heavy with the weight of his decision, Clay knelt beside Bramble, the loyal dog who had risked its life for the mission. Bramble's eyes met his, still filled with trust and loyalty despite the pain. Clay could feel the tug in his chest, the desire to stay and help Bramble, but also the need to keep moving forward to save the lives of those trapped and helpless. With a final lingering touch to Bramble's head, Clay stood, steeling himself. "You've done enough," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been so brave, and I won't forget it." He turned, running back towards the collapsed house, where the voices were growing louder, the cries for help now desperate. Every step felt like an eternity, but he pushed through, relying on his training and his will to keep going. His heart was in pieces, but he had made his choice. Bramble was part of his family, but those people, those strangers, were depending on him too. And that was what he had to focus on. As he reached the wreckage, Clay directed his team with precision, their training kicking in despite the chaos around them. They worked quickly, carefully pulling debris aside, reaching the trapped people. Clay's heart pounded in his chest, his mind still torn between the two lives, the one he was trying to save and the one he couldn't bear to lose. Every moment felt like the weight of the world, but there was no turning back now. As the last of the survivors was pulled to safety, Clay finally allowed himself a breath. The weight of the moment didn't lift, but he had done his part. He had saved lives. And when he turned back, Bramble was there, injured, but still waiting for him, loyal as ever. Clay knew that, in the end, this was the choice he had to make. The balance between saving lives, human and animal alike, was one that would always haunt him. But today, he had done what he could, and that was enough. In the aftermath, as he walked back to where the rescue dogs were waiting, Clay saw Bramble, standing tall despite the pain. He couldn't explain why he made the choice he did, but he knew one thing for sure. These dogs had not only helped him heal, but they had shown him a path to follow, one where love, sacrifice, and loyalty were more important than anything else. And, as always, Clay would continue walking that path, no matter how difficult or uncertain the road ahead. "I'll save you, Bramble," Clay said, his voice hoarse with tension. He carefully lifted the heavy stone, using all his strength to free Bramble. Sweat poured down his forehead, his hands trembling, but his resolve remained firm. These dogs needed him, and he couldn't give up. Finally, Clay managed to free Bramble, pulling the dog to safety despite its weakened state and pain. But as he looked around and saw other rescue teams pulling survivors from the rubble, a sense of relief washed over him. The task was far from over, but for the moment he had made the right choice. He took a deep breath, allowing himself a brief moment of peace before looking at Bramble, who was now safely outside. Though the dog was still struggling, its eyes held the same unwavering trust, a reminder of the bond they shared. Clay smiled through the exhaustion and pain, knowing that his determination had made a difference, not just for Bramble, but for everyone involved. This was what it meant to never give up. He had done everything he could, saved lives, and that was the most important thing. Yet, the relief didn't last long. In the moments of calm, a new wave of anxiety settled over him. One of the puppies, Midnight, was still trapped beneath a layer of rubble, close to where Bramble had been injured. Clay's heart sank when he saw Midnight, unmoving, unresponsive. He rushed over, the pain in his chest tightening as he realized how badly Midnight was hurt. The small dog was breathing weakly, its soft fur dirty from the dust and the injuries caused by the earthquake. Even with his years of experience as a firefighter, Clay couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness in the face of this. He knelt down, gently stroking Midnight, but the ache in his heart wouldn't go away. He had saved Bramble, but now Midnight lay there, unable to save itself. Regret and guilt surged within him. He couldn't save everyone. Part of him wanted to dive back into the rubble and search for life in Midnight, but time was slipping away. People were still trapped, still needing help, and he couldn't leave them. As he searched for a way to save Midnight, Clay felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He couldn't let any creature suffer longer, but sometimes he also realized that in moments like this, he wasn't the one who could do it all. No matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't save everyone. These moments didn't just test his physical strength, but his patience and spirit. Midnight remained there, its small body trembling with each shallow breath. Clay could feel the despair in the puppy's eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I've tried everything, but I can't save everyone." He gently picked up Midnight, carrying it out of the rubble. Even though it wouldn't survive much longer, at least he could give it a little more time. Time to feel love, to feel comfort. As he placed Midnight on the ground, looking into its fading eyes, Clay understood something in that moment. Sometimes, in life, we can't change everything. Even after doing everything we can't save every life. And that truth cut deep in his soul. Midnight wouldn't make it, and that was something he had to accept. But still, in the midst of pain and regret, Clay felt a strange peace. He had done everything he could. He hadn't given up. He hadn't turned away. And that was what mattered most. He lifted his head, looking up at the bright sky where sunlight pierced through the dark clouds. The sense of hopelessness within him began to ease. There were still other puppies who needed him, and the rescue mission was far from over. Clay stood up, taking a deep breath before turning back to his rescue team. He would continue the work, no matter the difficulties. He had realized that in this life, we can't always save everything, but as long as we don't give up, we can change the life of one being, big or small. And that was what he was striving to do, not give up, not deny love. He looked at his puppies, those little beings lying in the temporary kennel, receiving the love and care he had to offer. Though the pain of losing Midnight still lingered, he knew he couldn't quit. He had seen these puppies, from fragile beings, their bodies skinny and scarred, now beginning to show signs of life. A sense of new life was slowly returning to them, and he was an essential part of that journey. Clay spent most of his day caring for them, not just out of duty, but from the love he had learned to give day by day. Each morning, he prepared nutritious food for them, bathed them, and checked every little wound. He spent time observing their reactions, watching as they began to walk more steadily. They were no longer afraid, no longer huddled together in fear like they had been at the start. Their eyes were now filled with trust and gratitude, looking at him not with confusion, but with anticipation. In the afternoons, Clay would often sit by the kennel, gently petting the puppies, quietly observing each one. The largest of the group, Bramble, was no longer weak. Though still marked by the scars of the past, it no longer had that lost look in its eyes. Instead, it wagged its tail every time Clay approached, as if saying, "Thank you, I'm still here." For Clay, that was the greatest victory, the resurrection of Bramble, a symbol of strength and rebirth that he had helped create. Clay realized that it was love that had brought these puppies back to life. He hadn't used medicine or special methods to help them heal, but patience, gentleness, and the love he gave them. He understood that no matter how many challenges there were, love remained the most powerful remedy, helping them overcome everything. These puppies hadn't just received care. They had received a part of his heart, a vital part that helped them find hope again in life. The persistence and love Clay gave to them helped him realize an important truth. In life's most painful moments, it's love that helps us get through. Each smile from the puppies, each wag of their tails, was proof of the invisible strength of compassion. When he looked at them, Clay didn't just see the recovery of these small beings, but also the recovery of himself. Clay had learned that not everything could be saved, not everything could be changed instantly, but love, perseverance, and hope would guide him through the long road ahead. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't save everyone he had lost, but he could do something meaningful in the present to help these puppies find life again, and also help himself find life again. In the evenings, when he saw the puppies sleeping peacefully, Clay felt his heart lighten. He hadn't given up, and it was love that had helped him overcome the greatest challenges. These puppies weren't just the motivation for him to keep going with his rescue work, but the greatest hope in his life. Each day, the puppies were gradually recovering, and so was Clay. Was walking through the area when I noticed something strange. "There's a huge problem, and we need your help immediately." Clay's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced, trying to piece together what could be so urgent. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice steady, though his gut told him this was something serious. "There's a fire, Clay. It's close to the rescue site. The winds are strong, and it's spreading fast. The shelters, they might be at risk," the volunteer explained, panic clear in their voice. The words hit Clay like a punch to the gut. His first thought was of the puppies, his family. He had worked so hard to give them a safe place, to give them a chance to heal. And now, it seemed that everything he had worked for might be on the brink of destruction. Without hesitation, Clay sprang into action. "I'm on my way," he said, hanging up the phone. His mind raced, every instinct telling him to move fast, to act now. He grabbed his keys, ready to drive straight into the heart of the chaos. As he drove toward the rescue center, the flames in the distance seemed to grow taller, casting an ominous glow against the dark sky. The smoke started to fill the air, thick and suffocating, but Clay's focus was razor-sharp. He had to protect the puppies. He had to protect them all. Arriving at the site, the heat was almost unbearable. The fire raged in the distance, but Clay's first priority was the dogs. His heart pounded as he rushed inside, finding the team of volunteers already working quickly, trying to move the dogs into safety. Bramble, Midnight, Sunny, Whisper, Scout, Flint, and Hope, each one was carefully checked and moved out of danger. Clay breathed a sigh of relief when he saw them all accounted for, but there was no time to rest. The fire was growing closer, and there was still so much to be done. The workers were scrambling to secure the fences, but Clay knew it was only a matter of time before the wind shifted. He couldn't afford to waste another second. He moved quickly, his heart racing but his hands steady as he helped direct everyone to safety. In the chaos, Clay realized something powerful. This was more than just a rescue mission. It was a battle against everything that tried to tear down what they had built. His love for these dogs, his commitment to them, had pushed him to the brink before. But now, standing here, watching his team pull together, he felt that love was stronger than anything that could threaten them. The fire, the danger. It didn't matter. As long as they kept fighting, they could overcome anything. In those moments, surrounded by smoke and chaos, Clay felt the true strength of his mission. He had built a family, and no matter what, he would protect them with everything he had. Clay felt a chill run down his spine as he heard the unsettling news. "There's a dog facility on the outskirts of Pinebrook, but there are signs of animal abuse. I think we need to check it out." He hadn't expected to face something like this, but his gut told him it could be something very serious. Without hesitation, he immediately called together his rescue team and headed out. As they drove toward the outskirts, the landscape around them grew increasingly desolate and quiet, like entering a different world altogether. Abandoned homes, empty plots of land. And then, in the distance, Clay saw it. A dog facility surrounded by a tall fence where the kennels were hidden away. The first thing Clay noticed was the eerie silence. No barking, no lively sounds from the creatures that should have been well cared for. He led his team closer and observed through the fence. When his eyes locked on the scene inside, Clay could hardly believe what he was seeing. German shepherds were locked in cramped cages, barely enough room for them to stand or lie down. They looked weak, exhausted, and there were clear signs of abuse. Their fur was filthy, unkempt, and their small wounds untreated. The faint whimpers coming from the dogs tore at Clay's heart. "We need to get in there now," Clay said firmly. He couldn't bear to watch these creatures suffer any longer. With the help of his rescue team, Clay found a way into the facility undetected. The deeper they moved into the area, the more anger and unease bubbled up within him. The foul smell of dog waste and the damp, filthy conditions of the kennels were unbearable. But what angered him most was the indifference of the people running this facility. These dogs weren't just neglected, they were treated as mere commodities, exploited for unethical purposes. Clay spotted a large German shepherd, its thin body and sad eyes staring at him with desperation. The look wasn't one of a fearful animal. It was a look of a being who had lost all trust in everything. It had been abused for so long that it no longer had the strength to resist. "We can't leave them here another minute," Clay said, his voice breaking with rage. "They need to be saved immediately." The rescue team quickly sprang into action. Some began unlocking the cages, while others contacted animal welfare organizations and the police to report the abuse. But while his team worked, Clay stood there, his anger and unease growing. He looked at the puppies and knew that these creatures hadn't just been abused physically. They had been deeply scarred mentally. They had lost all trust in humans. In that moment, Clay realized that the fight he was in wasn't just about protecting animals. It was a fight to end this cruelty and inhumanity. He couldn't let these abusers continue harming innocent lives. They had to be stopped, and Clay was determined to lead this fight. Clay stood tall, looking at the rescued dogs and thinking about why he was doing all of this. The puppies, now free from pain and abandonment, had found safety in his arms. But inside Clay, the anger still burned. The desperate gaze of these dogs pushed him to act, not only to save them but also to expose the cruelty they had endured. He couldn't let the people running that facility continue to exist and keep tormenting innocent creatures. He turned to look at his rescue team, all of them exhausted from the long hours of hard work, but their eyes were full of determination. "We need to expose everything. We can't stop here. These beings have suffered enough," Clay said, his voice steady, without doubt or fear. He knew breaking this animal abuse ring wouldn't be easy, The facility had operated secretly for a long time, and those behind it wouldn't easily give up the massive profits they made from trafficking and abusing animals. But Clay had seen enough. He couldn't sit idle knowing that more dogs like Bramble, Midnight, and Sunny were still suffering under their cruelty. That same day, Clay began gathering information from those who had helped him rescue the dogs. He reached out to rescue workers who had previously accessed the facility and started collecting every document related to the operation of this dog breeding facility. Calls, emails, and tense meetings followed one after the other. Clay couldn't afford to delay or overlook any clues. During this process, Clay didn't work alone. Sarah, his old friend, continued to support him. She helped connect him with animal protection organizations and even reached out to professional investigators to assist in gathering evidence. Meetings with lawyers and legal experts helped Clay realize that in order to bring those responsible to light, he would need all the necessary evidence to prosecute them. A sense of persistence slowly grew within him. Clay wouldn't allow himself to stop, even knowing the road ahead would be difficult. Each piece of evidence he uncovered, each video recording of the abuse, made him more determined. He wouldn't let these perpetrators continue to harm innocent beings. He couldn't take it anymore, and if he didn't act, more creatures would suffer the same pain and abuse. Every night, after meetings and collecting information, Clay returned home, watching the puppies play happily, and felt his heart beat stronger. He knew he was doing the right thing. He couldn't let this cruelty go on, and he wouldn't stop until those responsible paid for their actions. Looking at the puppies, healthy and joyful, Clay felt a deep connection with them. He had not only saved them once, but was now protecting them from those who would continue to harm them. These dogs had changed his life, giving him a reason to keep fighting. And now Clay was determined to do everything he could to ensure no dog would ever suffer such senseless pain again. He had gone too far in this investigation, and his resolve had never been stronger. However, what he didn't expect was that seeking justice for these abused German shepherds would lead him into a dangerous battle of its own, gathering evidence, compiling documents, and piecing together the puzzle that would expose the truth. Clay could feel the weight of the investigation, but every day he spent with Sarah and Ivy, he knew they were one step closer to bringing the perpetrators to justice. But the threats from the man, the one who had warned him, lingered in Clay's mind. His words echoed in Clay's ears. "You won't win this fight." Clay couldn't forget the chilling look in his eyes, the weight of the dark forces that were determined to keep their cruelty hidden. Despite the fear, Clay pressed on. Every night, after another day of secret meetings, gathering intel and staying under the radar, he would return to the puppies, to his makeshift family. He watched them grow stronger, their trust in him unshaken, and in return, his resolve grew with each wagging tail and joyful bark. They were his constant reminder. There was no turning back. One evening, as Clay sat with the puppies, watching them play together, the enormity of what he was doing hit him. The fear he felt earlier now felt distant, replaced by an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He wasn't just rescuing animals, he was fighting for what was right, for justice, for those who couldn't speak for themselves. "Whatever it takes," Clay whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the playful pups. "I won't stop. Not now. Not ever." And so the next day, Clay, Sarah, and Ivy continued their work. They met with more experts, worked with legal teams, and gathered information that would finally help them put an end to the animal abuse. Their teamwork, their shared determination, and their deep belief in the cause kept them going, even when things got dangerous, even when the opposition seemed like it could overpower them. But Clay knew that together they were stronger than any threat. Each step they took toward uncovering the truth was a victory. With every piece of evidence they found, They moved closer to tearing down the operation that had hurt so many innocent creatures. And for Clay, no matter how tough the road ahead might be, he knew he would never give up. Not when there was still so much at stake. Not when those eyes, those innocent eyes, were watching him. The fight had only just begun, but Clay was ready. Clay and Ivy continued their investigation, sifting through available documents while Clay tirelessly gathered physical evidence at the site. One morning, as Clay and Ivy were preparing to head to the facility, Sarah called with an important update. "We've got a photo from a former volunteer at the facility. The abused dog in the picture is one of the ones we saw before. This could be crucial evidence," Sarah said over the phone. A surge of energy filled Clay. They couldn't delay any longer. This was their golden opportunity to shed light on what had been happening and expose the abusers. With Ivy, Clay rushed to Sarah's office, where they would continue gathering information. When they arrived, Sarah had already prepared several photos and documents she had received from other sources. One of the photos stood out in Clay's mind. It showed a German shepherd locked in a filthy cage, its matted fur and desperate eyes forever burned into his memory. "I'm sending these photos to animal protection organizations," Sarah said, pointing at the images on her computer screen. "With these, we can prove that the facility is breaking the law." Clay nodded, a sense of satisfaction settling over him as he saw their efforts beginning to pay off. But that satisfaction was short-lived. He knew the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. While they now had clear evidence of the abuse, the people behind this facility weren't going to go down easily. Clay knew that during the investigation and evidence collection, he and his team would face difficulties, possibly even danger. One of the key documents Ivy had found was a copy of the contract the facility had signed with dog breeders. This contract outlined how they organized the trafficking and abuse of German shepherds for profit. These documents were clear proof of the illegal activities and crimes they had been committing for years. With every step forward, with every piece of evidence gathered, Clay felt like he was unlocking a new door, one that led to the truth. Though the pressure was mounting, his hope grew stronger. He knew justice would prevail, and no matter how hard things got, he wouldn't stop until the abusers were exposed. After weeks of relentless work, Clay and his team had gathered enough evidence to submit a report to the authorities. They were ready to take action, but Clay couldn't shake the lingering feeling of worry. Despite their encouraging progress, he knew the battle was far from over. The people behind this facility weren't going to give up easily, and Clay would need to keep pushing forward for justice. Clay looked at the photos of the dogs, the beings he had saved. He understood that every effort, no matter how hard, was a step toward bringing justice and freedom to these innocent lives. That photo wasn't just evidence of the pain the dogs had endured. It was a testament to his perseverance in fighting for their lives. But he also knew the journey wasn't over. Every step, no matter how small, would face many obstacles. As the investigation progressed, Clay, Sarah, and Ivy worked tirelessly, gathering information from witnesses and animal protection organizations. Their team reached out to a few former volunteers from the abusive facility, people who had worked there and witnessed the cruelty firsthand. From the stories and evidence they provided, Clay began to understand the scale of the issue. The witnesses helped Clay and his team obtain critical information. One witness described seeing dogs being horribly mistreated, locked in tiny cages with no room to move, poorly cared for, and even beaten. They had insufficient food, water, and no medical treatment, despite injuries. Sick and injured dogs were still forced to work in these appalling conditions, and, alarmingly, they were often transferred to other facilities, possibly to be used for breeding or sold to illegal organizations. A tight knot of tension formed in Clay's chest. What he was hearing was worse than he'd imagined. These acts weren't just simple abuse. They were part of a larger network of illegal animal trafficking. The German Shepherds abused at this facility might be transferred to other breeding facilities, or even handed over to criminal organizations involved in illegal activities. However, there was a glimmer of hope for Clay. They had gathered crucial evidence. The photos of the abused dogs, along with copies of contracts and documents related to the sale of dogs, clearly proved that the facility was breaking the law. The animal protection organizations Clay had contacted had agreed to assist, providing additional documents and legal support. The police and relevant authorities were starting to take notice. Clay felt a surge of hope, knowing that justice was finally within reach. But in those moments of hope, an undeniable sense of anxiety still clung to him. Clay knew the investigation wouldn't be easy. The people behind this abuse were not ordinary criminals. They had money, power, and connections to protect themselves. Clay also realized that the closer he got to the truth, the more he was becoming a target. These people wouldn't give up their profits easily. With Sarah and Ivy's help, Clay prepared to continue collecting evidence. He knew this fight wasn't just about saving the dogs. It was about protecting himself and those around him from the retaliation of these abusers. He couldn't let fear make him falter. The puppies he had saved had become his greatest source of strength, and he wouldn't abandon them or justice for himself. In those tense moments, Clay realized that he had come too far to turn back now. He couldn't ignore this cruelty. The investigation was moving forward with solid evidence and the support of animal protection organizations. But there were still huge barriers ahead. The lack of funding and the complex politics of seeking help from authorities were proving to be major obstacles. Clay had hoped that, with the strong evidence they had, the authorities and organizations would act swiftly and handle the case in a timely manner. But the reality was much more complicated than he had imagined. One morning, as he and Sarah and Ivy went to meet with a major animal protection organization to present the case and request support, they received some unexpected news. Clay felt a wave of helplessness wash over him as he listened to the representative from the animal protection organization. "We understand the situation and appreciate all that you're doing," she said, but her eyes were filled with hesitation. "However, right now, we don't have the budget to support all the rescue organizations. The authorities need financial backing to conduct large-scale investigations, and we must prioritize areas directly affecting public health." The weight of the words crushed Clay. Despite everything he had done to gather evidence, he couldn't break through the financial wall. Everything required money, hiring legal experts, investigation costs, even the expenses just to maintain the rescue operations. The dogs were waiting for his help, but he was stuck, struggling with issues that were beyond his control. Clay felt as though he were standing at a crossroads. He had fought financial challenges before, but now, political obstacles made things even more complicated. Some authorities, despite acknowledging the legal violations in this case, were reluctant to intervene. They demanded concrete evidence before they would take action, but Clay and his team could only provide images and documents they had already collected. Everything seemed stuck in a vicious loop. Calls from government agencies, meetings with officials, nothing seemed to lead anywhere. Promises were made, but no real action followed. Even though Clay knew that saving these German Shepherds was the right thing to do, he couldn't help but feel powerless in the face of financial and political barriers. But despite the growing fatigue and frustration, Clay refused to give up. He thought about the puppies he had saved, the gratitude in their eyes. He couldn't abandon them, and he couldn't abandon himself either. The challenges he faced, no matter how daunting, couldn't compare to the suffering these dogs had endured. One evening, as he sat at his desk, Clay stared at the photos of the dogs he had saved. These images told a story of cruelty and pain, but they also filled him with a renewed sense of hope. He knew that even though he couldn't solve everything right away, as long as he kept fighting, One day justice would be served. Clay made a decision. He would not back down. He would continue searching for solutions, continuing to connect with those who could help. No matter how much financial strain there was, no matter how much politics got in the way, he would not give up on justice. He had come too far to turn back, especially with the German shepherds waiting for him, and the community looking to him with hope. But most importantly, Clay understood that without decisive action now, justice would once again be forgotten. And in this journey, he knew that he couldn't stop at collecting evidence and reporting it. He had to face those responsible for the abuse head-on. Deciding to testify in court wasn't easy for Clay. He had witnessed the cruelty of those behind the animal abuse facility, but he also knew that these people weren't easily defeated. They had power, money, and connections. But Clay couldn't let that stop him. He looked at the photos of the dogs, into the eyes of the creatures he had saved, and a strong resolve surged within him. He had to stand up. He had to fight for them. In the days leading up to the trial, Clay could feel the tension building inside him. Every meeting with the lawyers, every discussion about the case details, made him feel uneasy. He knew that when he stepped into the courtroom, he'd be facing opposition from the defendants, people he knew would do anything to justify their actions. Their lawyers wouldn't make it easy for him to win. They'd try to downplay the crimes, maybe even offer excuses for their behavior. But Clay couldn't back down. He remembered the hard moments, the helplessness he felt when he saw the puppies, the frail creatures who had endured so much abuse. He remembered their desperate eyes, the look of beings who had lost all trust in humans. That's why he had to stand up for them, because if he didn't, who would? He steeled himself for the difficult road ahead, but he knew he couldn't let fear take control. He'd learned how to face challenges during his years as a firefighter, and now the biggest test of his life was to protect these innocent beings. He'd saved people, saved animals, and now he was going to do it again, with his whole heart. As the trial day drew nearer, the pressure Clay felt became even more palpable. Looking at the files, the evidence he and his team had gathered, a sense of determination rose within him. He knew this battle would be tough, that he'd face threats and resistance from the defendants, but he wouldn't give up. He was fighting for the German shepherds, for justice, and for all the beings who had been abused and abandoned. Clay kept reminding himself that no matter the obstacles, he would not give up. He had come too far to stop now. And in that moment, he realized that testifying wasn't just about confronting the animal abusers. It was about standing up for the values he believed in: justice, compassion. As the days leading up to the trial passed, the physical and emotional exhaustion Clay felt grew stronger, making everything feel heavier. Each morning, Clay woke up with a tired body, muscles aching from long hours of work. He still spent most of his time caring for the German shepherds, but during those rare moments without them by his side, he could feel the exhaustion creeping in. The long days left him little time for rest. It always felt like he was racing against time, under pressure from all sides. His mind wasn't any better. Sleepless nights, meetings with lawyers, sessions with animal protection organizations kept him in a constant state of tension. Clay couldn't shake the anxiety about the legal battle ahead. Despite the clear evidence he had gathered, these abusers weren't easy opponents. He could see them trying to twist things, looking for loopholes to escape punishment. They had money, power, and connections to protect themselves. This made Clay question whether this legal fight would truly succeed. Doubts about his ability to fight through the exhaustion began to creep into his mind. Could he keep going? Would all his efforts, all his sacrifices, lead to something meaningful? These questions circled in his head, dragging him down, making him feel like he was being pulled in all directions. As the days passed, Clay couldn't help but reflect on everything he had been through. All the sleepless nights, The long, exhausting hours working with his team, the overwhelming uncertainty, it all seemed to have led him to this moment. When he looked at the puppies in their new homes, the ones he'd saved, he realized something profound. The hardships he had faced didn't compare to the joy he felt seeing these animals find love and safety. He remembered the uncertainty from when he first started the rescue organization. Back then, it was all a blur of financial struggles and obstacles that seemed insurmountable. But now, standing at the end of this long journey, everything he'd worked for was becoming clear. The dogs he'd saved were now in loving homes, thriving, playing, and surrounded by families who cherished them. Every story of a family adopting one of his German shepherds brought Clay a deep sense of pride and happiness. Bramble, Midnight, Sunny, Whisper, Scout, Flint, and Hope, they had all found their places in the world. Places where they were no longer just survivors, but beloved family members. Clay could still clearly remember the day Bramble had been adopted by a family with young children. The strong dog, once the leader of the pack, was now the protector of this family, keeping them safe and bringing joy to their lives. Midnight, the quiet and reserved one, found a peaceful home with a couple who loved long walks in the park. And Sunny, always the energetic, smiling one, now lived with a young couple who took him on playful adventures every weekend. It was moments like these that made Clay feel that all the struggles had been worth it. He had given these dogs a chance at a new life, and in return, they had given him a sense of fulfillment he never thought possible. The trials, the battles, the endless hours, it had all led to this: the transformation of broken souls into thriving, loved companions. Clay walked through the rescue center one last time, seeing the empty kennels where the dogs once lay. His heart felt a bittersweet ache, but it was also filled with pride. He had fought for them, and now they were free. As he stood there, looking at the place he'd built, Clay finally understood. It wasn't just about saving the dogs, it was about saving himself. The love, the sacrifices, and the resilience he'd shown were all reflections of the strength he had found within himself. And as the door closed behind him, he knew this chapter was ending, but the work, the mission, and the legacy of the dogs he had saved would live on forever. Clay turned to leave, ready for whatever came next, but knowing one thing for certain: he had done something meaningful. He had made a difference, not just in their lives, but in his own as well. Clay looked at the stories unfolding around him and felt a deep sense of peace settle in his heart. Despite the challenges life had thrown at him, these dogs now had a brighter future. He couldn't help but feel proud of what he had accomplished, how he had changed their lives, pulled them from the darkness of abuse into a world filled with love. Every day, as he visited the families who had adopted the dogs, Clay felt the joy not just from the dogs, but from the families themselves. They didn't just adopt a dog. They gained a companion, a vital part of their lives. It was then Clay realized he had fulfilled his mission, and that realization filled him with a sense of completion like nothing else. Happiness and fulfillment radiated within Clay. He had witnessed the transformation of these dogs, from fragile, desperate creatures to healthy, happy dogs filled with love. Every time he received a message saying one of the German shepherds had found a new home, an indescribable joy filled his heart. His work wasn't just about saving dogs. It was about creating opportunities for them to live a life free from fear and abuse. Standing in the rescue organization's yard, watching the puppies play and run freely, Clay no longer felt tired or anxious like before. He had done the right thing, and now he could be proud of his achievements. These German shepherds no longer had to endure pain and abandonment. They had found love, care, and new homes where they could live happy, fulfilling lives. Clay smiled as he looked at each dog and thought about the journey he'd been on. He knew that while this work would never be easy, witnessing the change in these dogs' lives was the greatest reward he could ever receive. The German shepherds he had saved were no longer just survivors. They were symbols of rebirth, of hope, and of resilience. And in this journey, Clay realized something important. He wasn't fighting alone. Just a few months ago, he had felt lost, alone in a world full of challenges. But now, as he looked around, Clay could feel a strong community forming, a family he never expected to find. The animal rescue community he had built was not only made up of people who loved animals, but also of companions, people who shared his goals and worked together to create change. Clay had connected with so many passionate, dedicated individuals. Sarah, his old friend who had been by his side through it all, wasn't just a legal supporter, but a trusted friend who shared in both the struggles and the victories. Ivy, a devoted rescue worker, had also become an indispensable part of the organization. She wasn't only skilled, but always there to lend a helping hand wherever needed. Alongside them, volunteers from all over had united, their collective efforts strengthening the rescue community. This sense of connection with his community made Clay feel less alone in the fight. He had found a family not just in the dogs, but in the people who stood beside him. Clay watched the volunteers, their hands busy preparing for the new fundraising campaign, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The weight of everything no longer rested solely on him. The team was in this together now. Everyone shared the work. They cleaned the kennels, prepped food for the dogs, and even organized community meetups to raise awareness and gather support. Each person had their part to play, and together they had forged a strong rescue organization. "We're doing this not for money or fame, but for the lives we save," Clay said at one of their group meetings, his voice resolute as he gazed around at their determined faces. "Thank you for standing by me. Together, we don't just save dogs, we make the world a better place for all of us." His words resonated deeply within each member of the group. Every time they heard him speak, their resolve grew stronger. They were no longer just volunteers. They were a family, a community bound by the shared responsibility to protect and love animals. They weren't in it for the spotlight. They were in it for the innocent lives they saved. For Clay, feeling connected to this community filled him with a warmth he'd never known. He realized that life wasn't just about personal achievements. It was about making a positive impact on the world around him. Watching everyone work side by side, Clay felt a deep pride in what they had accomplished and were still achieving. This wasn't just an animal rescue organization. It was a home, a place where everyone worked toward a higher purpose. With renewed faith in the community and justice, Clay felt stronger than ever. He knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but with his friends by his side, he would never have to fight alone. As he looked at the German shepherds he had saved, a new sense of hope blossomed within him. These dogs, once abandoned and vulnerable, had found new homes, loved and cared for like true members of a family. Standing in the rescue organization's yard, Clay watched the dogs play freely, tails wagging with joy. He thought back to the early days when these dogs were weak, injured, and fearful. But now everything had changed. Dogs like Bramble, Midnight, Sunny, Whisper, Scout, Flint, and Hope had each found their forever homes, homes filled with love. Bramble, the biggest and strongest dog in the group, now lived with a family with young children. They had adopted him after seeing him at one of the organization's fundraising events. Clay remembered the day clearly. When Bramble was brought to his new home, a child ran up and hugged him tightly. Clay watched as Bramble wagged his tail, gazing lovingly at the child, no longer carrying the fear he once had. Every victory, every adoption, was a reminder of the difference Clay and his team had made. It wasn't just about rescuing the dogs. It was about giving them a new chance at life, a life filled with warmth, safety, and love. And in that, Clay found the most profound sense of fulfillment he had ever known. Clay looked into their eyes, and the emotion hit him like a wave. Bramble, the once stoic dog, had found a family to protect, a family that it could now shower with love. It was a moment of raw emotion. The dog had finally found its place, somewhere it belonged. Midnight, the quiet and patient dog, had found a home with someone who craved peace. Clay couldn't help but feel joy when he saw Midnight living in a small house with a new owner who loved long walks in the park. Midnight, once a dog who shied away from the world, had become a cherished companion on those daily strolls. It had found serenity and calm. Sunny, the lively and spirited one, was adopted by a young couple early on. They adored Sunny for its energy, its zest for life. Now, Sunny had a life filled with laughter, adventure, and joy. Clay smiled whenever he saw pictures from their new family, realizing that this was more than just a dog being saved. It was a life transformed. Sunny, despite the suffering it had endured, now had a warm home filled with love. Whisper, shy and reserved, had found a patient, loving family. The anxiety it once carried began to fade. Clay remembered when they first met, Whisper wouldn't even look him in the eye, always retreating into the shadows. But now, every time Clay visited, Whisper would run to him, no longer afraid. It had found trust again, and that change was something Clay treasured deeply. Flint, the dog with the sleek black coat, now lived with an elderly couple. They had come to Clay after losing their old dog, hoping to find a new companion. Clay vividly remembered their faces when they first met Flint. They instantly bonded with the dog, and Flint had found a loving family to care for and protect. And then there was Hope, the smallest dog, the one Clay had held most dear. After all the suffering, after fighting through weakness and fear, Hope had finally found a family full of love. Clay recalled the day Hope was adopted, when the new owners promised to love and care for it forever. And now, Hope was healthy, happy, and full of life in its new home. Looking at these dogs, his dogs, Clay felt a profound sense of happiness. He hadn't just saved them. He had given them a new chance, a new life. These German shepherds were no longer just animals he rescued. They were companions, friends, part of a larger story that Clay would never forget. The pride filled him as he saw them thriving, each one finding happiness. They had fought their battles, overcome pain, and now they were living in homes where they were loved and cared for. Each one had a story of survival, a story of finding their place in the world, and Clay knew that his work had helped them find that. Clay stood in the rescue shelter, watching the dogs play in the yard, tails wagging in joy. He thought back to the early days when these same dogs were weak, fearful, injured. But now, everything had changed. Bramble, Midnight, Sunny, Whisper, Scout, Flint, and Hope, each one had found a family, a home full of love. Bramble, the largest and strongest, now lived with a family with young children. Clay remembered the day Bramble was brought to its new home, the moment a child ran up and hugged the dog. Bramble, once so full of fear, now wagged its tail, looking into the child's eyes with trust. Midnight, reserved as always, had found a home with someone who enjoyed quiet walks. It was now a cherished part of their routine, a companion that brought peace into their daily life. Sunny, ever the energetic one, had brought joy to a young couple. Its adventures filled their days with laughter, reminding Clay that even after all the pain, Sunny had found a place to belong. Whisper had become part of a family that gave it patience and love. Clay couldn't help but feel proud when he saw how far it had come from its initial fear. It had learned to trust again. Flint had found solace with an elderly couple who had instantly fallen for him. Clay knew the joy that Flint brought into their lives, and it made him happy to know the dog was now loved and cared for in their gentle hands. And Hope, the tiny survivor of it all, had blossomed in its new family. After everything it had gone through, it had found a place to feel safe, loved, and at peace. Looking at them all, Clay felt complete. These dogs had been through so much, but now they were living the lives they deserved. He had helped them find that, and in doing so, he found himself too. This wasn't just about rescuing animals. It was about creating families, about healing, about showing that love could always win, no matter how hard things had been. And with each dog that found its forever home, Clay knew that his journey wasn't just about the past. It was about the new lives he helped create and the hope he gave, not just to these animals, but to himself as well. He couldn't have asked for a greater reward. Clay stood in the middle of the rescue center's yard, watching the German shepherds run and play freely, their tails wagging joyfully. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. He remembered the early days, when he had nothing but vague ideas of building a rescue center, and everything felt so far out of reach. Back then, he wasn't sure if he would even make it this far. Yet here he was, watching those same dogs that had been weak, abandoned, and abused, now thriving in a safe, loving environment. As Clay looked around, his heart swelled with pride. The sound of playful barks and the sight of happy, healthy dogs running around were more than just a reward for all the struggles he had faced. They were proof of everything he had fought for, not just the dogs' survival, but for the chance to offer them a new life. It wasn't just about saving them anymore. It was about showing them that love, care, and safety could exist again. Bramble, the biggest and once the most fearful dog, was now living with a family with young children. Clay could still remember the moment when Bramble was introduced to his new family. The child had run up, arms outstretched, and Bramble, once so cautious and scared, had responded with joy. He saw Bramble wagging his tail, no longer the fearful dog he'd been, but a protector for this new family. Midnight, the calm and patient dog, had found a family that loved quiet walks in the park. Clay's heart warmed when he saw Midnight walking peacefully beside his new owner, no longer hiding in fear, but calmly enjoying the companionship of someone who understood him. Sunny, with his endless energy and boundless joy, had found his home with a young couple who loved to take him on adventures. They adored his spirit and infectious happiness. Every time Clay received photos of Sunny running happily in the grass or resting beside his new family, his heart felt lighter. Whisper, the shy one, had become part of a family that was patient and loving, teaching Whisper to trust again. Clay could still remember the first time Whisper had avoided him, too scared to make eye contact. But now, every time Clay visited, Whisper would run up to him, no longer fearful, showing that it had finally found its place in the world. Flint, with his sleek black coat, had found a home with an elderly couple who were looking for a companion after losing their old dog. Clay could still recall the way their eyes lit up when they met Flint for the first time. It was instant love, and Flint had become their loyal companion, bringing comfort and joy to their lives. Finally, Hope, the little dog Clay had grown particularly attached to, was now thriving in a home filled with love and care. After all the pain, all the battles with fear and weakness, Hope had finally found its family. Clay still remembered the day Hope was adopted, and the promise made by its new owner to love and care for it forever. Seeing Hope now, healthy and happy, was a victory Clay would carry with him always. Looking at the dogs he had saved, Clay felt a profound sense of happiness. He hadn't just saved them. He had given them new opportunities, new lives. These German shepherds, once victims of abuse and neglect, were now loved members of their families, living their lives to the fullest. Each of these dogs had a different story, but they all had one thing in common. They had found love and safety, something Clay had fought for. Every wag of a tail, every playful bark, was a testament to the power of perseverance, love, and hope. And in those moments, Clay knew that everything he had endured, every challenge, had been worth it. The life he had once dreamed of was no longer just a dream. It was real, and it was right in front of him. The rescue center had grown, the dogs were thriving, and the community Clay had built, the community of people who shared the same values, was strong. They were all in this together, working to make the world a better place, one life at a time. Clay smiled, standing there, watching the dogs. His mission had always been about more than saving animals. It had been about rediscovering himself, about finding a purpose. He had saved the lives of those dogs, but in doing so, he had saved his own. Clay stood at the edge of the rescue center, taking in everything around him. The paths were clear, the play areas fully equipped, and everything had come together. The center wasn't just a safe haven for the dogs. It was a symbol of hope for anyone who had lost faith in life. Looking at the German shepherds running joyfully in the yard, Clay's heart softened. The sight of these little beings, once broken and abandoned, now running freely without fear or loneliness, filled him with a sense of peace. He had dedicated so much of his life to building this place. Every corner, every detail was carefully planned, from the kennels to the medical supplies, the food provisions, and the play zones. Clay knew that for these dogs to thrive, it wasn't just about food and water. It was about love, care, and a nurturing environment where they could heal both physically and emotionally. Clay smiled as he watched the dogs interact with each other and the volunteers. He had seen them through their worst days, and now, watching them run freely, he couldn't help but feel immense pride. The center had not only become a shelter for the animals, but also a place where people could come together to connect, support one another, and make a meaningful impact. Stepping out of his office, Clay surveyed the area once more. The air around the center buzzed with life and hope. The mowed grass, the playful barks, and the sound of paws hitting the ground reminded him that the hard work, the endless hours of sacrifice, had paid off. Every step forward from this point on would be part of a new chapter, a chapter of love, care, and protection. The center had become a haven not only for the German shepherds, but for all creatures in need of protection. Walking through the yard, Clay felt a quiet contentment settle in his chest. The dogs were happier, healthier, and each one had a new, loving family. Bramble, Midnight, Sunny, Whisper, Flint, and Hope were all living their new lives, each with a family that loved them for who they were. He remembered the day when Bramble had been adopted, the joy on the child's face when they first embraced Bramble, no longer the fearful dog that had arrived, but one who had found safety and love. Seeing Midnight, calm and content in his new home, or watching Sunny play fetch with his new owners, Clay couldn't help but feel like he had helped create these miracles. They were no longer the victims of neglect and abuse. They had transformed into the thriving, joyful companions they were meant to be. The sight of them reminded Clay of his own transformation. He hadn't just built a rescue center. He had built a home, a place where life could be renewed, where broken spirits could heal, and where trust could once again be fostered. The pain, the sacrifice, the struggle, all of it had led to this. And as he looked at the dogs playing in the yard, his heart swelled with satisfaction. This was what he had been working for, not just the survival of the dogs, but the creation of a future full of possibility, love, and connection. Clay knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be more dogs to save, more battles to fight, more lives to change. But standing there, watching the dogs run freely, he realized that this was the start of something incredible. The Pinebrook German Shepherd Rescue wasn't just a shelter. It was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always the possibility of new beginnings. He smiled softly to himself, the weight of the past years lifting as he watched the dogs, his dogs, find their place in the world. It was no longer about the obstacles, it was about the love, the triumphs, and the life he had helped create. Clay spent both his mornings and afternoons checking on each dog, his attention to detail unwavering. He knew that although these dogs no longer had to endure abuse, their past still cast long shadows over their psyches. He approached each one gently, letting them feel safe, free from fear. Every day, Clay took the time to play with them, creating spaces of joy where they could relax and bask in love. Through this process, he also connected with the community, animal lovers, animal rights organizations. They visited the center, participated in fundraising campaigns, and together they built a strong support network. Clay no longer felt alone in his mission. The center was not just an animal rescue. It had become a place where people with shared visions and goals came together. The meetings with volunteers and organizations helped Clay realize that this work wasn't just a personal mission. It was part of a larger mission to protect animals and advocate for their rights within a united community. As each day passed, Clay saw more changes in the dogs. The puppies were now healthier, happier, and more confident. Bramble, Midnight, Sunny, Whisper, Scout, Flint, and Hope all showed remarkable progress. These dogs were not only physically healthy, but they had also rediscovered trust in people, in life. They were no longer weak and fearful creatures, but strong warriors, ready to face the world. Though immense joy filled Clay's heart as he saw their recovery, he couldn't ignore the fact that his work was never truly finished. Every day, as the rescue center received more dogs, new challenges arose. The German Shepherds continued to be rescued, and every time one found a new home, Clay felt an overwhelming sense of joy. But he also knew that while the rescue center had become a home full of love and hope, the work of saving animals was an endless journey. Clay understood that each dog he saved was just a part of his long journey. Each pup needed him, and he would never give up on them. This work might not have an end, but the sense of accomplishment and fulfillment came from the positive changes he was making. He couldn't change the past for these dogs, but he could help them build a brighter future. With determination and love, Clay continued his mission, not just saving animals, but also protecting a better future for all the beings that needed him. He knew the road ahead was long, but with belief and perseverance, any obstacle could be overcome. And in every action, in every caring gesture, Clay saw how Pinebrook German Shepherd Rescue had truly become a home, a place where these puppies found safety, love, and hope. As the days passed, Clay not only saw changes in himself, but also understood that each dog he saved brought a valuable lesson about love and sacrifice. Every being in the center had its own story, but they all found healing through the love Clay and his team had given them. He realized that in this world, not every problem could be solved, but every small action, every right decision could make a huge difference in the lives of these small beings. Clay had not only saved the puppies, but he had also saved himself. He had found a new purpose in life, a reason to continue each day, to face the challenges ahead with hope and strength. As Clay watched the dogs, those very beings he had once saved, play freely in a safe environment, a great wave of happiness washed over him. Every wag of their tails, every grateful look from the puppies was the greatest reward he could ever receive. Each time he saw a new family adopt a German Shepherd, Clay felt the power of love. These families didn't just adopt a dog. They welcomed a new companion, a family member. The dogs didn't just bring joy, they became integral parts of their new lives, teaching them about persistence, unconditional love, and loyalty. And as he saw those dogs thriving, healthy and happy, Clay knew he had done something meaningful. From being a steadfast firefighter, Clay had now become the protector of the fragile. Every day he spent with these dogs was not just care, but a healing journey. While this rescue mission would never truly end, Clay had come to realize that this was the path he was meant to take, the one he had chosen. The German Shepherds didn't just need him, he needed them too. They had taught him about sacrifice, compassion, and the true strength of love. Looking around the rescue center, seeing the dogs he had saved, Clay realized that the challenges he had faced weren't failures, but steps in a journey toward something better. This work didn't just change the lives of the dogs, it changed his own life as well. He had found faith in the future, and in every moment, in every being he helped, Clay felt that love and sacrifice would always prevail. And in that moment, as he watched the puppies play, healthy and joyful, in the center's yard, Clay felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He knew that no matter how difficult life might get, he would never give up. Because he understood that even the smallest good deed can spark massive change. The belief in justice, compassion, and love would guide him through every step of his journey. Clay had come a long way, starting from days full of doubt and hardship to building a rescue center filled with hope for abandoned and abused German shepherds. But through all that, he had not only found faith in justice, but also in unconditional love, perseverance, and sacrifice. The dogs had found new homes, and he had rediscovered his own purpose. This story is a reminder that no matter how difficult life gets, sacrifice and compassion will always be the keys to overcoming challenges. Clay didn't just save the small lives of the puppies, but he gave them hope and changed his own life. Love and persistence can change the world, and you can do that too. Never give up, no matter how tough the road may be. Keep going, keep doing good things, because every small action can make a difference. Share this story